Chapter 22:10. Combined with the soul-reaping bell and Long Qing's worries, Xiao Chun guessed that something might have happened to Dragon Palace. Moreover, Xiao Chun soon thought of the possibility that the missing Yang Chun, Tao Ming, and the others had attacked Dragon Palace and killed Long Yuan. However, on second thought, Xiao Chun felt that it was impossible. First of all, Dragon Palace was not weaker than the Sword Sect, and Long Yuan was a veteran emperor. How could Tao Ming kill Long Yuan in just 5 days? Not to mention Tao Ming, even Junwuya would not be able to kill Long Yuan in just 5 days. Therefore, Xiao Chun felt that it was impossible. Moreover, Yang Chun and Tao Ming, to put it bluntly, were already stray dogs. Even their headquarters had been occupied by the Sword Sect. How could they deal with Dragon Palace? Not to mention now, even if Heavenly Sect was at its peak, it would not be a match for Dragon Palace. Therefore, Xiao Chun felt that it was impossible. However, the situation was indeed a little strange. The emperor had died, and Long Qing could not contact anyone in Dragon Palace. To be cautious, Xiao Chun called Zhou Song and said seriously, "Second senior brother, please send someone to investigate what has happened to Dragon Palace recently." He asked Zhou Song to send someone to investigate what had happened in Dragon Palace recently. Hearing this, Zhou Song did not ask any more questions. He nodded and left quickly. After Zhou Song left, Long Qing still looked worried. Of course, Long Qing was more worried about Long Yuan. After all, Long Yuan had been good to her all these years. Long Qing naturally did not want anything to happen to him. Looking at Long Qing's worried face, Xiao Chun comforted her. "Second sister, don't worry. Let's wait for second senior brother to send back the news. Then we'll talk about it." They didn't know what had happened to Dragon Palace, so it was too early to say anything. Hearing this, Long Qing nodded. While Xiao Chun had already noticed the abnormality in the Dragon Palace and asked Zhou Song to send someone to investigate, Yang Chun, Tao Ming, and Long Mia were sitting together in the Dragon Palace. Just as Xiao Chun had guessed, what had happened in Dragon Palace was indeed related to Yang Chun and Tao Ming. Moreover, the ringing of the soul-dying bell did indicate the death of an Emperor Master. The Emperor Master who had died was none other than the ancestor of Dragon Palace, Long Yuan. Because at this time, in front of Tao Ming and the others, Long Yuan's body was on the spot. As for who killed Long Yuan, there was no doubt that it was Tao Ming. Only Tao Ming, who was also an Emperor Realm Master, had the ability to kill Long Yuan. However, Tao Ming's killing of Long Yuan was not only due to his contribution alone. There was also another person's contribution that could not be ignored, and that was Long Shui. If Long Mia hadn't poisoned Long Yuan when he was not around, causing him to be unable to exert his strength, Long Yuan wouldn't have been killed so easily by Tao Ming. It could be said that Long Yuan's death was unjust. He had died in the hands of his own people. At this time, with the death of Long Yuan, Long Mia quickly took control of Dragon Palace by virtue of his position as the palace master. Those who were loyal to Long Yuan and Long Qing were also ruthlessly eliminated by Long Mia. Finally taking control of Dragon Palace, Long Mia looked at Tao Ming and smiled. "Senior, your strength is indeed extraordinary. This time, we were able to kill Long Yuan thanks to your help. According to the agreement, Dragon Palace is willing to worship you as the ancestor." Long Mia and Tao Ming had secretly reached an agreement long ago. As for when, it was naturally when Long Qing led people to support the Sword Sect. On that day, an elder of Dragon Palace secretly visited Tao Ming and Yang Chun. This elder of Dragon Palace was Long Mia's confidant. It was during that meeting that both sides reached an agreement. Tao Ming helped Long Mia kill Long Yuan and help him take control of Dragon Palace. In return, Long Mia appointed Tao Ming as the new ancestor of Dragon Palace and took in a group of experts from Katian sect. Yang Chun and Tao Ming, who were already at their wits' end, agreed to Long Mia's plan without much hesitation after hearing about it. This was because if they didn't agree to Long Mia's plan, it would be difficult for Tao Ming and Yang Chun to compete with the Sword Sect. In this way, it was a good choice to switch to Dragon Palace. Moreover, this time, almost all the higher-ups of Katian's sect survive without any casualties. With such strength, it was hard to say who would inherit Dragon Palace in the future. Long Mie was blinded by jealousy and thought of cooperating with Tao Ming. This was simply asking a tiger for its skin. One had to know that Tao Ming was an emperor-level expert, while Long Mie was just an end-realm expert. He thought that Dragon Palace would belong to him in the future, but he didn't know that it was no longer up to him to decide who would inherit Dragon Palace in the future. It was also because the time wasn't right that Tao Ming didn't make things difficult for him on the spot. Therefore, when he heard Long Mie's words, Tao Ming just smiled faintly and said, "Palace Master is too polite. We're just taking what we need. All right, I'll leave the rest to Palace Master. We'll go and rest first." As he spoke, Tao Ming left with Yang Chun and returned to his cave dwelling. In the cave, Yang Chun and Tao Ming sat opposite each other. At this moment, Yang Chun had a cold smile on his face and said, "There is actually such a stupid person in this world. Does he really think that Dragon Palace will belong to him in the future, just because we helped him destroy Long Yuan?" Yang Chun despised Long Mie to the extreme. He really didn't expect that there would be such a stupid person in this world. This was no longer asking a tiger for its skin, but seeking his own death. Hearing Yang Chun's words, Tao Ming also smiled slightly. Obviously, he also felt that Long Mie was so stupid that it was cute. However, Tao Ming still reminded him, "It's not the time yet. Wait until Long Mie completely stabilizes the situation in Dragon Palace. Then, it will be time for us to take action. As for this period of time, it's okay to let him be happy for a while. Remember, don't be too hasty. Now is not the time to seize power." Although Tao Ming didn't care about Long Mie, it was obviously better for Long Mie to stabilize the situation in Dragon Palace than for Tao Ming and his disciples to step in. After Long Mie completely stabilized the situation in Dragon Palace, Tao Ming would directly kill Long Mie. Then, it would be natural for him to take control of Dragon Palace without any effort. It was like making a wedding dress for someone else. However, Long Mie still hadn't reacted at all. He didn't know that his approach was simply inviting a wolf into the house. As the saying goes, it's easier to invite a god than to send him away. Now that Long Mie had successfully invited Tao Ming and his disciples, it was not up to him to send them away. In the face of Tao Ming's reminder, Yang Chen also nodded seriously and replied, "Master, rest assured. I understand. Seeking for collection, monthly votes, recommendation." End of chapter. Chapter 22:11. The Dragon Palace suffered a great change. Long Yuan was killed by the joint forces of Long Mie and Tao Ming. The experts who were loyal to Long Yuan and Long Qing were also annihilated. The Dragon Palace suffered a great change. Long Yuan was killed by the joint forces of Long Mie and Tao Ming. The experts who were loyal to Long Yuan and Long Qing were also annihilated. It was impossible to hide such a big event from the world. Soon, Xiao Chun learned about what had happened in the Dragon Palace. He also knew that Yang Chun, Tao Ming, and the others had joined the Dragon Palace. When Xiao Chun first heard the news, he was shocked. He did not expect that Yang Chun and the others would join the Dragon Palace. Moreover, Tao Ming even killed Long Yuan. However, after calming down, Xiao Chun quickly realized that Long Yuan's death must have been caused by someone from the inside. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for Tao Ming to kill Long Yuan on his own. At most, it would have been a lose-lose situation. Someone in the Dragon Palace betrayed them. It was not difficult to guess who it was. It was the Palace Master of the Dragon Palace, Long Mie. Xiao Chun had even guessed the reason behind Long Mie's betrayal. It probably had something to do with Long Qing. Come to think of it, the position of Palace Lord was so valuable. Would Long Mie be willing to hand it over to someone else? Everything was due to jealousy. Long Mie was jealous that Long Qing had taken away his position as the Palace Master, so he chose to betray them. He joined forces with Tao Ming to kill Long Yuan and take control of the Dragon Palace. However, Xiao Chun, Zhou Song, and Wu Huan sat in the courtyard and took a sip of wine. Xiao Chun shook his head slightly and said, "This Long Mie must have lost his mind. He actually went to Tao Ming and joined forces to kill Senior Long Yuan. This is simply inviting a wolf into the house. Xiao Chun could see the end of Long Mie at a glance. He had killed Long Yuan alone, so would the Dragon Palace become his? Little did he know that he was paving the way for someone else. Thinking about it, without Long Yuan in the Dragon Palace, who could keep Tao Ming in check? Could it be that Tao Ming helped Long Mie because it was as simple as it seemed? It was no exaggeration to say that Tao Ming had been eyeing the Dragon Palace since the beginning. Moreover, Long Mie's betrayal had a great impact on Xiao Chun and the Sword Sect. At least, it gave Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the higher-ups of the Katian sect a way out. Originally, Xiao Chun was absolutely confident that he could destroy Hetian's sect in this battle. But now, even though he occupied Hetian Mansion, Tao Ming and the others also occupied the Dragon Palace. In this way, it was equivalent to a superficial exchange between the two sides, and Tao Ming did not suffer any losses. In the end, it was Dragon Palace that suffered the real loss. To put it bluntly, it was because of Long Mie, the idiot, that Dragon Palace became the scapegoat of Katian's sect. He opened up a new path for Katian's sect, which was already doomed, and used the entire Dragon Palace as a shield for Katian's sect. He cursed Long Mie in his heart. After all, it was his stupidity that allowed Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the others to escape. But it was useless to curse Long Mie to death now. Moreover, Xiao Chun had another choice. Should he continue to pursue Tao Ming and the others? Because if he continued to pursue them, it was tantamount to starting a war with the Dragon Palace. After all, the Dragon Palace was now in Long Mie's hands. Moreover, the Sword Sect was exhausted after the fierce battle. It was difficult for them to continue fighting with the Dragon Palace at this time. Long Mie deserves to die. But junior brother, now is not the time to think about this. What should we do next? Do we continue to fight? Zhou Song asked. Zhou Song agreed that the Sword Sect wasn't suitable to continue the battle with their current situation. Besides, after this battle, the Sword Sect had annexed Katian sect. They needed time to digest such a huge piece of territory. After all, the situation in Katian sect wasn't stable yet, and the Sword Sect needed to be strong enough to defend it. No matter how one looked at it, it wasn't suitable for the Sword Sect to start another war. If not, it wouldn't benefit the Sword Sect. Upon hearing Zhou Song's words, Xiao Chun could only let out a slight sigh. I know, but my second sister... Xiao Chun was aware of this, but Long Qing was in a tough spot. Ever since she learned about Long Yuan's death, Long Qing had locked herself in her room and refused to open the door even when Xiao Chun called for her, which left Xiao Chun heartbroken. Besides, the Sword Sect was indebted to Long Qing and the Dragon Palace. At this moment, Xiao Chun couldn't just stand by and do nothing. Even without Long Qing, Xiao Chun wouldn't just sit by and do nothing. Zhou Song and Wu Huan seemed to have guessed Xiao Chun's thoughts. However, they didn't dissuade him. After all, Xiao Chun was the sect leader of the Sword Sect, and Xiao Chun's will represented the will of the Sword Sect. As long as Xiao Chun gave the order, no matter how exhausted the Sword Sect was, they wouldn't back down. But as soon as Xiao Chun finished his sentence, Long Qing's door opened abruptly, and Long Qing strode out with red, swollen eyes. Xiao Chun hurried forward and asked with concern, "Second sister, you..." "Don't worry, little brother. I'm fine. I know this isn't the time to act on impulse, and I won't do anything foolish." "Don't worry," Long Qing interrupted before Xiao Chun finished his sentence. Long Qing was aware of the current situation and knew that it was meaningless to attack the Dragon Palace now. After venting her anger, Long Qing regained her composure. However, she still had a request that she hoped Xiao Chun could agree to. Long Qing looked at Xiao Chun and said unhurriedly, "Little brother, can you save those people from the Dragon Palace? They are loyal to me and Master. Now that Long Mie is in power, he will definitely try his best to kill them. Can you save them?" Long Qing knew that it wasn't possible to avenge Master in a day and night, and she couldn't act on impulse. However, apart from revenge, Long Qing's only request was for Xiao Chun to save those people from the Dragon Palace who were loyal to her and Long Yuan. In the face of Long Qing's request, Xiao Chun agreed without hesitation. Second sister, even if you didn't ask, I would still do it. You can now send a message to the Dragon Palace and find a reliable person to contact. I will send someone to pick them up. It was not difficult for Xiao Chun to save these people, and he didn't need to start a war with the Dragon Palace. Seeing that Xiao Chun had agreed, Long Qing didn't say anything else. She nodded slightly and immediately contacted the people from the Dragon Palace through the voice-transmitting charm. She told them to leave the Dragon Palace as soon as possible and head to the designated location. At that time, only the people from the Sword Sect would be there to pick them up. After doing all this, Long Qing fainted in Xiao Chen's arms. She was really tired and sad these days. Please add, recommend. End of chapter. Chapter 22:12. Looking at Long Qing, who seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep in his arms, a hint of heartache flashed across Xiao Chen's eyes. He murmured softly, "Don't worry, second sister. I'll get my revenge one day." Xiao Chen naturally wouldn't stand by and watch Long Qing take revenge. Xiao Chun, Long Qing, and Xian Yuanling were already like a family many years ago. As a younger brother, he naturally wouldn't stand by and watch. He personally carried Long Qing back to her room and then checked her body. He found that she was just overly sad and didn't have any other serious problems. Xiao Chun was secretly relieved. Then, Xiao Chun left Long Qing's room and returned to the pavilion in the courtyard. He looked at Zhou Song and Wu Huan and said, "Senior brother, bring some people to the Dragon Palace. But you don't have to go deep. You just need to rescue those people from the Dragon Palace." Long Qing had already sent a message back to the Dragon Palace and told one of the End Realm Elders to bring people to the rendezvous point. At that time, there would be people from the Sword Sect to receive them. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Song and Wu Huan nodded in agreement. Then, the two of them brought a group of Sword Sect experts and headed towards the Dragon Palace. They weren't going to come into direct contact with the Dragon Palace and Tao Ming. They were just going to rescue people. Xiao Chun also specially instructed them not to go too deep into the Dragon Palace. Secondly, they weren't to fight. Once they rescued people, they were to retreat immediately. It wasn't time for revenge yet. Xiao Chun could only forcefully suppress the killing intent in his heart. After the battle with the Hittian sect, the Sword Sect indeed needed some time to rest. At the same time, they needed some time to digest the Hittian manor that they had just conquered. However, the Heaven-Closing Prefecture no longer existed. The former Heaven-Closing Prefecture had been merged into the Sword Mansion, and the Great Thousand World seemed to have returned to the right path. It had once again become the land of the 10 prefectures. Xiao Chun personally oversaw the Jian clan. At the same time, Zhou Song and Wu Huan rushed to the agreed-upon location as quickly as they could after receiving their orders. It was a small town on the border of the Long Mansion. This was not the core area of the Long Mansion. Long Qing had sent a message to the Elder of the Dragon Palace, and both sides had agreed to meet here. When Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the others arrived, the Elder of Dragon Palace had already arrived with thousands of experts and disciples of Dragon Palace. They were all loyal to Long Qing and were people that Long Mie had to kill. When both sides met, the first thing the Elder of Dragon Palace asked was, "How is Long Nu?" Long Nu was naturally referring to Long Qing. Upon hearing this, Zhou Song nodded and replied, "Don't worry. Long Qing is the second sister of our sect master. The Sword Sect will naturally not treat her badly. There's not much time left. If you have anything to say, save it for when we return to the Sword Mansion." Knowing that Long Qing was not in any danger, the Elder of Dragon Palace secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Then, he nodded and accepted Zhou Song's proposal. After all, this was still the territory of the Long Mansion. No one knew when Long Mie would come, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. Before leaving, the Elder of Dragon Palace looked back angrily in the direction of the Dragon Palace. Long Mie, it was all because of this bastard. Because of him, the Dragon Palace today was no longer the Dragon Palace of the past. Thinking about the past few days, the Dragon Palace could be said to have been filled with blood. Anyone who dared to go against Long Mia was killed, especially those who were loyal to Long Qing and Long Yuan. They were all killed. The reason why they were able to escape was all because of luck. When it happened, they were not in the Dragon Palace. That was why they were able to escape. However, it was obvious that Long Mia did not plan to let them go. He had already sent people to kill them. After a lot of hardships, they finally arrived at the place where they had agreed to meet with the Sword Sect. They were prepared to temporarily head to the Sword Sect to meet Long Nu. Long Yuan was dead. Long Qing was obviously the backbone of this group. However, just as they were about to leave, for terrifying auras descended from the sky. These auras were obviously at the End Realm level. For End Realm experts appeared. Seeing this, 2 End Realm elders stepped out. As for the others, they took the chance to leave with the experts of the Sword Sect. In the sky, 6 End Realm experts who were once elders of the Dragon Palace faced each other. 4 of them had already submitted to Long Mia. Looking at the other 2, one of the elders spoke. A wise man submits to circumstances. Long Mia is the master of the Dragon Palace. The 2 of you should stop being so stubborn. He wants to control the Dragon Palace. What a wishful thinking. His cooperation with Tao Ming is the same as inviting a wolf into the house. If the Dragon Palace is destroyed one day, he will be the biggest sinner. Hearing this, one of the 2 shouted angrily. It was obviously impossible for the 2 of them to submit to Long Mia. They wanted to personally kill Long Mia, so how could they choose to submit? Hearing this person's words, one of the 4 elders of the Dragon Palace, a middle-aged man, shouted coldly, "Why are you wasting your breath on them? Just kill them." Saying this, he was ready to attack. 4 against 2, they obviously had the advantage. However, at this moment, Zhou Song and Wu Huan suddenly appeared beside the 2 Dragon Palace experts. Seeing Zhou Song and Wu Huan appear, the 4 Long Mia henchmen were stunned. Then, they shouted coldly, "Zhou Song, Wu Huan, why does your sword sect want to interfere with the matters of the Dragon Palace?" "Hee, my sword sect is naturally not interested in the matters of your Dragon Palace. However, Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the people of Hitian sect are all people that my sect must kill. Therefore, my sword sect naturally won't stand by and do nothing." Hearing this, Zhou Song laughed coldly and replied, "Extremely arrogant. Emperor Ming is now the old ancestor of our Dragon Palace. You want to kill him?" Hearing this, one of them shouted coldly, "Haha, the old ancestor of the Dragon Palace? Only Long Mia can think of this. Forget it. I'm too lazy to talk nonsense with you today. If you want to fight, then fight. If not, then scram." Hearing this, Zhou Song laughed loudly. Tao Ming had actually become the old ancestor of the Dragon Palace. This was the biggest joke in the world. Long Mia didn't use his brain to think. Since Tao Ming had become the old ancestor of the Dragon Palace, then could the position of Palace Master still belong to him? Would the Dragon Palace still be the Dragon Palace? However, this was not what Zhou Song should be concerned about now. The purpose of this trip was to save people. Now, as long as he delayed the 4 of them and gave the others enough time to retreat, Zhou Song and Wu Huan's mission would be considered completed. Hearing Zhou Song's words, the 4 henchmen of Long Mia's face darkened. Then, they attacked together. Seeing this, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, and the other 2 were naturally not afraid. Immediately, the 8 End Realm experts fought fiercely, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22:13. The 8 End Realm experts fought intensely. With the help of the Sword Sect, in the end, the Dragon Palace people retreated safely. Zhou Song and the other 3 also left safely after a fierce battle. The 8 End Realm experts fought intensely. With the help of the Sword Sect, in the end, the Dragon Palace people retreated safely. Zhou Song and the other 3 also left safely after a fierce battle. In a battle between End Realm experts, if it was 2 against 1, they might have a chance to kill the other. However, in a situation where they had the same number of people, it wasn't easy to kill an End Realm expert. Moreover, Zhou Song and the others didn't want to fight. After bringing the Dragon Palace people out of danger, the four of them also found a chance to leave safely. If Zhou Song and the others wanted to leave, as they were all End Realm, the four Dragon Palace elders naturally couldn't stop them. Just like that, Zhou Song and the others completed the mission of helping the Dragon Palace people safely retreat. As for the Dragon Palace side, after Zhou Song and the others left the Dragon Manor, they didn't continue to chase. After all, the current Dragon Palace didn't want to have any conflicts with the Sword Sect. This included Tao Ming and Yang Chun. Their mission was to control the Dragon Palace and not continue to fight with the Sword Sect. Therefore, Tao Ming and Yang Chun didn't send people to chase. After safely retreating from the Dragon Manor, a few days later, under the leadership of Zhou Song and Wu Huan, the Dragon Palace people arrived safely at the Sword Manor. After settling everyone down, Zhou Song and Wu Huan brought the two End Realm elders to meet Xiao Chun. The two of them were loyal to Long Qing, or rather, the four people of Long Yuan. One was called Long Xiang, and the other was called Long Yi. In the main camp of the Hetian Manor, the two of them successfully met Xiao Chun and also Long Qing. Seeing Long Qing, Long Xiang, and Long Yi were really emotional. At the same time, they scolded Long Mie for his actions and hoped that Long Qing could take revenge for Long Yuan. Hearing Long Xiang and Long Yi's scolding, although Long Qing hated Long Mie to the bone, he had already calmed down and knew that some things couldn't be rushed. If there was anyone to blame, they could only blame it on the fact that no one had noticed Draconic Annihilation's abnormality before. Draconic Annihilation and Tao Ming had joined forces and succeeded in the end. Now, if they wanted to kill Draconic Annihilation again, it would not be a simple matter. Looking at Long Xiang and Long Yi, Long Qing said in a low voice, "We naturally have to take revenge for Master, but we can't act rashly. My opinion is to stay in the Sword Sect for now. When the time is right, we can kill Long Mie and take revenge for Master." Long Qing spoke his mind. Although Long Xiang and Long Yi couldn't wait to kill Long Annihilation, they knew that it was impossible. Even though they were unwilling, they could only follow Long Qing's orders since Long Qing had given them the order. Long Yuan was dead, and Long Qing was their master from now on. Long Xiang and Long Yi didn't have any doubts about this. They chose to listen to Long Qing. As such, Long Xiang and Long Yi cupped their hands and bowed to Xiao Chun, who was sitting beside Long Qing. "Thank you for saving our lives, sect leader Xiao Chun. No matter what, the Sword Sect's rescue was timely. If it wasn't for the Sword Sect's help, they probably wouldn't have been able to leave Long Mansion safely." Xiao Chun didn't mind their gratitude. He waved his hand and said, "It's a small matter. Second sister and I are siblings. Second sister's matter is my matter, so don't worry about it." As for helping Long Xiang, Long Yi, and Xiao Chun, it was all because of Long Qing, so there was no need for them to thank him. It was obvious that they couldn't return to Dragon Palace for the time being. Based on the current situation, it was definitely the best choice for Long Xiang and Long Yi to stay in the Sword Sect. At least their safety was guaranteed. Moreover, Long Qing was also in the Sword Sect. Therefore, Long Xiang and Long Yi wouldn't leave. Dragon Palace still had Tao Ming. Yang Qin's matter could only be put aside for the time being. Xiao Qun really didn't have the time and energy to deal with them. There were many things to deal with in the Sword Sect. Of course, the most important thing was the previous He Tian Mansion. After all, they had just taken over the He Tian Mansion and merged it into the Sword Mansion. There were many things to deal with. Under the leadership of the higher-ups in the Sword Sect, the situation in the He Tian Mansion became more and more stable. The Sword Sect control over the He Tian Mansion also became more and more stable. Just as the Sword Sect was gradually merging the He Tian Mansion into the Sword Mansion, a light screen suddenly appeared in the sky. The names of the 10 great Lingtian sects were displayed on the light screen. However, the names of the Equipment Refining Sect and the He Tian Sect gradually disappeared. Then, the names of the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Yin Tower appeared on the list. This was Tenzu's recognition. Tenzu recognized the status of the Sword Sect and the Heavenly Yin Tower and promoted the two sects to the 10 great Ling Tian sects. As for the equipment refining sect and the He Tian sect, they could be considered to have been destroyed. Therefore, they naturally could no longer be counted as the 10 great Ling Tian sects. The Sword sect and the Heavenly Yin Tower had just replaced them. As for Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the higher-ups of the He Tian sect, although they were not dead, the He Tian sect no longer existed. Now, Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the others were attached to the Dragon Palace. Therefore, the He Tian sect would naturally be kicked out of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Perhaps it was because of this that the Dragon Palace was still one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. However, no one could guarantee how long this situation would last. Perhaps Tao Ming and the others would directly take action tomorrow. Of course, this was not important to Xiao Chun. With the appearance of the light screen and the change of the 10 great Ling Tian sects, the Sword sect was naturally very excited. Many disciples cheered. After so many years, the Sword sect had finally returned to the 10 great Ling Tian sects and stood at the peak of the Great Thousand World again. Even Song Xing felt like crying as he looked at the light screen in the sky. Although he was already prepared, when the truth was placed in front of him, Song Xing still could not believe his eyes. He could not believe that one day he would actually be able to see the Sword sect return to the altar and blossom with the glory of the past with his own eyes. It had always been Song Xing's wish to let the Sword sect return to the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Now that his wish had finally come true, how could Song Xing not be happy? It was not just the Sword sect. On this day, the entire Great Thousand World was shaken by the change of the 10 great Ling Tian sects, especially when the words Sword sect appeared on the light screen again. Many sword cultivators in the Great Thousand World were deeply moved, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 22:14. The Sword sect used to be a sacred place for sword cultivators in the world. However, with the death of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign and some other changes, as well as the rise of the coiling sect, the Sword sect finally fell from its pedestal. The Sword sect used to be a sacred place for sword cultivators in the world. However, with the death of the heaven-breaking sword sovereign and some other changes, as well as the rise of the coiling sect, the Sword sect finally fell from its pedestal. There was even a period when many people thought that the Sword sect was going to be destroyed. However, every time the Sword sect was pushed to the brink, it would always come back from the dead. It was because of this perseverance that the Sword sect defeated a series of powerful opponents in the end. They even defeated the coiling sect in the end and successfully occupied a place among the 10 great Ling Tian sects, gaining the recognition of Tenzu. The golden light screen in the sky did not dissipate for a long time. This was Tenzu's announcement to the world. All the sword cultivators in the world were excited because the Sword sect had returned to its pedestal, let alone the disciples of the Sword sect. Everyone could not control their emotions. Even Xiao Qin's blood was boiling. After all, ever since he came to the Great Thousand World, Xiao Qin had been working hard to restore the Sword sect to its former glory. Today, his goal had finally been realized. The only flaw was that he had defeated the coiling sect this time. He had not been able to kill Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the other higher-ups of the coiling sect. In the end, they had escaped to the Dragon Palace. However, this cannot be helped. After all, Xiao Chun did not have the ability to predict the future. However, if they escaped, then so be it. In the future, he would definitely kill them. Whether it was for the Sword sect or for the Long Qing, Xiao Chun would not let Tao Ming, Yang Chun, and the others off. Everyone in the Sword sect celebrated. Many disciples spontaneously organized banquets. Xiao Chun naturally wouldn't stop them. This was indeed something to be happy about. Xiao Chun even ordered that the Sword sect celebrate for 3 days. All the wine and food would be provided by the sect. The Sword sect was extremely excited. However, it was not only the Sword sect but also the Heavenly Yin Tower. This time, there were 2 major sects among the 10 great Ling Tian sects. One was the Sword sect, and the other was the Heavenly Yin Tower. The Heavenly Tower was also bustling with noise and excitement. However, compared to the Sword Sect, the Heavenly Tower was not as excited. This was normal. After all, the predecessor of the Heavenly Tower was the Equipment Refining Sect. The rise of the Heavenly Tower was entirely based on the Equipment Refining Sect. Now that the Heavenly Tower had replaced the Equipment Refining Sect and became one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects, it was hard for the entire Equipment Refining Sect to be excited. After all, many people still had feelings for the Tool Refining Sect. However, Yin Sheng and Yin Litian didn't care about this. Perhaps it could be said that all of this was within their expectations. From the beginning, when they took action against the Equipment Refining Sect, they had already expected this result. The Heavenly Tower would definitely replace the Equipment Refining Sect and become one of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Moreover, given the ambitions of Yin Litian and Yin Sheng, it was likely that this wasn't their only goal. They probably had even greater ambitions waiting to be carried out. Regardless of the Heavenly Yin Tower, the Sword Sect was celebrating. Xiao Chun even brought Qin Shiru's daughter and parents over to the place where the Heavenly Sect used to be. However, the Heavenly Sect was no longer here. Now, it belonged to the Sword Sect. Qin Shiru, who had been worried about Xiao Chun, heaved a sigh of relief when the Heavenly Sect was destroyed. At the same time, they were sincerely happy for the Sword Sect and Xiao Chun. Originally, it was just a celebration for the Sword Sect. However, as time passed, sword cultivators from all over the Great Thousand World rushed to the Sword Sect. For these sword cultivators, the Sword Sect was a sacred place in their hearts. Now that the Sword Sect had risen, these sword cultivators naturally had to come to congratulate them. Regardless of whether they were disciples of the Sword Sect or not, the Sword Sect represented the sword cultivators of the Great Thousand World. The stronger the Sword Sect was, the more glory these sword cultivators would feel. Thus, they were sincerely happy for the Sword Sect. Xiao Chun wasn't stingy with these sword cultivators who had rushed over from all over the world. He welcomed as many of them as he could. After all, the Sword Sect now had the strength and wasn't afraid of anyone causing trouble. What a joke! In the current Great Thousand World, who would dare to cause trouble in the Sword Sect? Not only did they have the strength of Ling Tian's sect, but they also had the title of Ling Tian's sect. Furthermore, they were recognized by Tenzu, so they had the right to do so. Everyone drank to their heart's content during the 3 days of the banquet. Even Xiao Chun was drunk during these 3 days. Every day, he drank with Song Xing and the others and tossed all the annoying matters to the back of his mind. During the 3 days of the banquet, the Sword Sect could be said to have gathered all the sword cultivators in the world. Naturally, there was no lack of people with high cultivation. Through Xiao Chun, Song Xing, and the others, the Sword Sect had indeed roped in some experts. Among them, there was one End Realm expert. This person had always been a solo cultivator. However, this time, he chose to join the Sword Sect. As such, the Sword Sect naturally had one more End Realm expert. Xiao Chun wasn't stingy and directly conferred this person as one of the deputy sect masters of the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect naturally wouldn't reject powerful experts. As for some young sword cultivators with average talent and low cultivation, they also wanted to join the Sword Sect. This time, they also took the opportunity to come a try. After all, anyone could see that the Sword Sect had once again returned to the ranks of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. In the future, their achievements would naturally be glorious. If they could become a disciple of the Sword Sect, they would naturally be able to obtain many benefits. Firstly, there was no need to talk about the change in status. The disciples of the 10 great Ling Tian sects would definitely be respected wherever they went. Very few people would dare to offend people from the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Secondly, there were cultivation resources and illusions. After successfully returning to the ranks of the 10 great Ling Tian sects, the Sword Sect would only become more and more powerful in the future. The more powerful the Sword Sect was, the more cultivation resources its disciples would be able to obtain. Naturally, their cultivation speed would also be faster. Moreover, once they joined the sword sect, not only would they be able to obtain the protection of the sword sect, but even their families would be able to benefit from it. As such, many disciples from large families wanted to join the sword sect. Many people expressed their intentions to join the sword sect. However, because there were too many people, at least over 100,000 people, the sword sect naturally couldn't accept all of them. After all, the sword sect was one of the 10 great Lingtian sects. They definitely couldn't be careless in recruiting disciples. Otherwise, if any random person could join the sword sect, wouldn't that make the sword sect disciples a joke? Moreover, in Xiao Chen's heart, the sword sect disciples had to be elites. They might not be geniuses, but at the very least, they couldn't be too weak. Otherwise, they would become a joke when they went out. Therefore, the sword sect definitely couldn't accept all of these young people. However, the sword sect did indeed need some fresh blood. After all, the continuous battles had caused many casualties among the sword sect disciples. They urgently needed to be replenished. Begging for collection, autumn monthly ticket, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22:15. After 3 days of revelry, there were still many people who did not choose to leave. Most of them were young people. After 3 days of revelry, there were still many people who did not choose to leave. Most of them were young people. They had already celebrated the return of the sword sect to the top 10 Lingtian sects, but these young people were still unwilling to leave. In the end, they even gathered outside the sword sect and begged the sword sect to accept them. They also expressed their desire to join the sword sect and become a disciple of the sword sect. Xiao Chun did not violently chase away these young people who wanted to join the sword sect, because the sword sect did indeed need to recruit disciples on a large scale. Moreover, after successfully returning to the top 10 Lingtian sects, Xiao Chun was also considering many things that he had neglected before should be standardized. For example, when it came to recruiting disciples, many major forces would basically set a rule that they would recruit disciples from the outside every few years. Anyone who could pass the assessment would be able to pass. The sword sect also needed to follow this rule. Therefore, Xiao Chun, Song Xing, and the other heavenly sect higher-ups gathered in the main hall of the Hetian residence. Xiao Chun said with a faint smile as he looked at the crowd, "Everyone, I've called everyone here today to talk about the recruitment of disciples. I've been thinking for the past few days that it's time for our sword sect to return to the right track after going through a series of battles." Xiao Chun did not beat around the bush and directly explain the purpose of gathering everyone here today. Upon hearing that, Song Xing nodded in agreement. Sect leader is right. The disciples are the foundation of a sect. Any sect needs a continuous influx of new blood. Recruiting disciples is indeed a major matter for the sword sect. We can't be careless about it. Song Xing placed great importance on the recruitment of new disciples. After all, the new disciples were the future of a sect. The stronger and more talented the disciples were, the greater the potential of a force. Think about it. If there was a shortage of disciples, and there were no geniuses who could shoulder the burden, then no matter how strong the older generation was, there would always be a day when the sect would decline. Therefore, any sect would place great importance on recruiting and nurturing disciples, and the sword sect was no exception. Following Song Xing's words, Zhou Song, Wu Huan, Nangong Guan, and the other vice sect leaders also spoke out. They all agreed with Song Xing's words. Seeing that there was no disagreement among the crowd, Xiao Chun smiled and said, "Indeed, the disciples are the foundation of our sword's gate, and we can't afford to be careless. Now that there are so many young people who want to join the sword's gate, what do you all think?" Coincidentally, the sword's gate was in need of new disciples. This time, taking advantage of the grand event where the sword's gate returned to the top 10 Ling Tian sects, there were many youngsters who were willing to join the sword's gate. It was a good opportunity to select the best among them. Xiao Chen's idea was quickly approved by Song Xing and the others. However, at this moment, Lin Qing spoke up. "Sect leader, now that our sword sect is at its peak, why don't we take this opportunity to hold a recruitment meeting for new disciples? Open to the entire Great Thousand World. Anyone under the age of 100 can sign up. We don't need to limit it to these people. In this way, all the young geniuses in the Great Thousand World will gather in the Sword Sect, and our Sword Sect will be able to recruit more young geniuses. Xiao Qin's eyes lit up when he heard Lin Qing's suggestion to hold a recruitment meeting for new disciples that was open to the entire Great Thousand World. Coincidentally, during this period of time, Swords Gate could be said to be in the limelight. And with this momentum, if it was as Lin Qing said, it would obviously be able to attract a lot of talented young people. When the time came, if they could absorb these people into Swords Gate, it would definitely be a good thing for the development of Swords Gate. Xiao Qin immediately felt that Lin Qing's idea was feasible. Without much hesitation, he laughed loudly. Haha, good. Deputy Sect Leader Lin Qing's suggestion is good, very good. He completely agreed with Lin Qing's suggestion. It was more perfect and perfect than he had imagined. In this way, the Sword Sect would gain more. It was not only limited to the tens of thousands of people outside the Sword Sect, but also to the entire Great Thousand World. They had to gather all the young people in the Great Thousand World, especially the young sword cultivators, and let them join the Sword Sect and become disciples of the Sword Sect. Xiao Qin did not have any objections. As for the others, including Song Xing, they were all in favor of Lin Qing's suggestion. Although holding a recruitment event like this would definitely require a huge amount of financial support to the current Swords Gate, this little bit of money was simply a drop in the ocean. It was nothing at all. No one objected. Then, they discussed some details and finally decided that the recruitment meeting would be held in a month's time. The location was set to be in the Sword Sect. A month's time was enough for the Sword Sect to stabilize the situation in the Sword Sect. On the other hand, it would allow the young warriors who were interested to join the Sword Sect to make sufficient preparations and give them enough time to rush to the Sword Sect. After the matter was settled, Xiao Qin finally made the final decision. Since Lin Qing was the one who suggested this, you will be in charge. Zhou Song and Wu Huan will assist you from the side. He handed over the recruitment meeting to Lin Qing. Since Lin Qing was the one who suggested this idea, it was naturally the most suitable to hand it over to him. As for Xiao Qin, he directly became a hands-off manager. This was Xiao Qin's habit. Unless it was an important matter that concerned the survival of the Sword Sect, Xiao Qin would rarely handle it personally. Song Xing and the other deputy sect masters were enough. Moreover, Xiao Qin did not like to be trapped in these trivial matters all day long. Compared to dealing with these trivial matters, Xiao Qin was more willing to cultivate and improve his cultivation. The recruitment meeting was thus decided. 3 days later, the Sword Sect also announced to the public that they were preparing to hold a recruitment meeting for new disciples. Anyone below the age of 100 could participate. If they passed the assessment, they would immediately become a Sword Sect disciple and receive the protection of the Sword Sect and enjoy the treatment of a Sword Sect disciple. When this news was released, it naturally caused a huge uproar in the Great Thousand World. After all, the recruitment of disciples by the Sword Sect was extremely attractive. One must know that the status of the Sword Sect was no longer the same as before. Moreover, in order to attract more people, Lin Qing deliberately announced the treatment of the disciples of the Sword Sect. In the face of the high-standard treatment of the disciples of the Sword Sect, even the lowest outer disciple was enough to make many people jealous. Every month, not only would they receive a large amount of cultivation resources and elixirs, but they would also be able to enjoy the various cultivation secret realms in the Sword Sect. Furthermore, they would also receive guidance from the powerhouses of the Sword Sect. Who wouldn't want such a cultivation environment? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. In a chapter. Chapter 22:16. Following the announcement of the Sword Sect that the recruitment competition would be held a month later, all the young cultivators in the Great Thousand World were completely excited, especially the young sword cultivators. As sword cultivators, their first choice was naturally the Sword Sect. Although the Sword Sect had held recruitment competitions before, could the former Sword Sect and the current Sword Sect be mentioned in the same breath? Before Xiao Qin succeeded as the sect leader of the Sword Sect, the sword sect would hold recruitment competitions from time to time. However, the sword sect was already in decline at that time, so the number of people who came to participate was pitifully small. After all, any young cultivator would definitely want to join the strongest sect, and the 10 great Lingtian sects were undoubtedly their first choice. As for a sect like the sword sect, which seemed to be in decline and could even be destroyed at any time, it was obviously not in the list of most people's choices. This was because once one joined a sect, it was tantamount to sharing both honor and disgrace. If the sect was destroyed, then the disciples of the sect would definitely not have a good ending. The disciples of the heavenly sect had foresight on this point. At this time, many of the disciples of the heavenly sect were either killed or dragged to the various large spirit stone mines under the sword gate to work as laborers. Their days were very miserable. Therefore, the strength of a sect was directly related to its attractiveness to many cultivators. The stronger the sect, the more people would naturally be attracted to join it. Perhaps one might think that this was unfair. In this way, wouldn't the stronger the sect, the weaker the sect, and the weaker the sect, the weaker the sect, the weaker the sect, the weaker the sect? In fact, this was indeed the case. This was the law of survival. The weak were destined to be eliminated, and the strong would only become stronger. However, the current sword sect had returned to the ranks of the 10 great Ling Tian sects. Moreover, it was at its peak. As such, the sword sect's recruitment competition this time was obviously very attractive. Moreover, Lin Xing had directly announced the sword sect's treatment of disciples at all levels. Compared to the other 10 great Ling Tian sects, the treatment of the sword sect's disciples was only higher, not lower. This made it even more attractive. Countless young cultivators in various cities in the Great Thousand World began to prepare to head to the sword sect and fantasize about successfully joining the sword sect and becoming a disciple of the sword sect. Thinking about the change in status once they became a disciple of the sword sect, just this point alone was enough to make countless people excited. I'm going to participate in the sword sect's recruitment competition. Haha. I'm determined to win in the sword sect's recruitment competition this time. Son, you have to work hard this time. If you can join the sword sect, you'll bring honor to your ancestors. The rise and fall of the family in the future will depend on you. Poor cultivators from ordinary families wanted to join the sword sect and change their fates. Disciples from large families also set off for the sword sect under the escort of their elders. Unlike the poor martial artists, the disciples of the big clans could also cultivate in their own clans. But if they could enter the sword's gate, it would be a completely different concept. There is no need to mention the amount of cultivation resources and cultivation environment. The sword sect's cultivation environment was definitely better than 99% of the forces in the Great Thousand World, and it was not just a little bit better. However, for disciples from large families, this was secondary. What they valued the most was the change in status after joining the sword sect. Some disciples from large families did not lack cultivation resources, at least for now. What they valued was the identity of a disciple of the sword sect. Because once they became a disciple of the sword sect, it was equivalent to them being protected by the sword sect. Not only them. Even if their families were to encounter danger in the future, the identity of a disciple of the sword sect was sufficient to make many people fearful. After all, a disciple of the sword sect, even if it was only an outer core disciple, was not someone that could be killed as one wished. If one angered the sword sect, in the entire Great Thousand World, apart from the other sects in the Great Thousand World, who else could withstand the wrath of the sword sect? As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, even his chickens and dogs can ascend to the heavens. So long as one person from a family was able to join the sword sect, it was equivalent to adding a protective talisman for the family, an additional life-saving trump card. Therefore, in the face of the sword sect's recruitment competition, it was not only the martial artists from poor families who placed great importance on it, but the disciples from large families also placed great importance on it. Countless young martial artists came from all over the Great Thousand World, from all the major cities, and rushed towards the same destination. And this destination was the sword sect. As the time drew closer, More and more young cultivators arrived at the cities around Swords Gate and settled down, quietly waiting for the start of the Swords Gate recruitment tournament. At the same time, Xiao Chun brought his wife, daughter, parents, Long Qing, Nangong Guan, and the others back to the Sword Sect. As for the former Hetian mansion, although it was not truly stable, there were no major problems. Therefore, Xiao Chun left Songxing to oversee the situation there while he rushed back to the Sword Sect to prepare to host the recruitment competition. After returning to the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun spent his free time with his parents, wife, and daughter. This made Qin Shiru and the other women very happy. However, if one were to ask who was the happiest during this period of time, it would be Xiao Chen's daughter, Xiao Wan. Xiao Wan was the happiest to be able to have Xiao Chen's company. On this day, Lin Qing took the initiative to find Xiao Chun. The two sat down in a pavilion in the bamboo garden. Xiao Chun personally brewed a cup of tea for Lin Qing, then smiled and asked, "How was it? Did you encounter any difficulties in the recruitment competition?" Lin Qing had always been in charge of the recruitment competition, so Xiao Chun rarely asked about it. At this time, when faced with Xiao Chen's question, Lin Qing answered truthfully. "Sect Master, the scale of this recruitment competition is much larger than I expected. There are still 10 days until the start of the recruitment competition, but according to the statistics below, the number of young martial artists who have arrived at the cities around the Sword Sect has already exceeded 100,000, and this number is still increasing. The number of people who wanted to participate in the recruitment competition was much more than expected. It could be said that the attraction of the Sword Sect to young martial artists was far more terrifying than Xiao Chun and Lin Qing had imagined. However, Xiao Chun was happy about this. He said with a smile on his face, "Isn't this a good thing? The more people who come, the more people think highly of our Sword Sect." "That's true, but with so many people, Sect Master, the cost of this recruitment competition is probably much higher than expected." Lin Qing smiled bitterly when he heard this. Lin Qing was a little distressed by the huge cost, but Xiao Chun did not mind at all. He smiled and said, "It's nothing. It's just money. Lin Qing, don't worry about money. This is the first recruitment competition that our Sword Sect is holding since we returned to the 10 Great Lingtian sects. We must do it well and not tarnish the Sword Sect's reputation. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 22:17. Xiao Chen didn't care much about money. In Xiao Chen's opinion, money was nothing. Xiao Chen didn't feel any heartache about spending it on the recruitment competition. Xiao Chen didn't care much about money. In Xiao Chen's opinion, money was nothing. In Xiao Chen's opinion, money was nothing. Xiao Chun didn't feel any heartache about spending it on the recruitment competition. With Xiao Chen's words, Lin Qing felt relieved. As long as they had enough money, everything else would be easy to handle. In fact, Lin Qing's worries were making a mountain out of a molehill. The current Sword Sect was completely different from before. Not only was it powerful, but it was also rich in money. Lin Qing didn't have to worry about anything and could just do whatever he wanted. After receiving Xiao Chen's affirmation, Lin Qing quickly left and personally went to arrange the recruitment competition. Under Lin Qing's supervision, the recruitment competition was being prepared in an orderly manner. As the time for the recruitment competition approached, more and more young cultivators arrived at the Sword Mansion. They were all preparing to participate in the recruitment competition. Some were poor cultivators, while others were disciples of large clans. For the recruitment competition, the Sword Sect had specially prepared accommodations for the participants in the surrounding cities. As the time approached, the process of the recruitment competition for the Sword Sect was finally finalized. According to Lin Qing and the others' discussion, there were 3 stages to the recruitment competition. The first stage was the preliminary selection. At that time, many young cultivators who participated in the recruitment competition would be brought to a small world in the Sword Sect called the Demon King Plain. There were many demonic beasts inside. Those who passed the first round would be able to enter the second round. As for the second round, It was a life-and-death battle with some of the heavenly sect's disciples who were on death row. It just so happened that many of the heavenly sect's disciples had been captured by the Sword Sect. Some of them had not killed any of the Sword Sect's disciples and were brought to the various spirit stone mines to work as laborers. As for those whose hands were stained with the blood of the Sword Sect's disciples, they were directly used by Lin Qing as a test for this recruitment competition. As for the third round, it was an ordinary single-elimination tournament. This was also to determine the ranking of the new disciples. Basically, as long as one could pass the first and second round, they would be qualified to join the Sword Sect. The third round, on the other hand, was mainly to test one's talent and strength. Because of this, many of the higher-ups of the Sword Sect would be present during the third round, including Sect Master Xiao Chun. There is no need to hide the process of the large competition. Therefore, 3 days before the start of the large competition, Lin Qing announced the process of the large competition. Many young warriors who came to participate in the large recruitment competition knew the entire process. Naturally, no one had any objections to the process of the large competition. Moreover, even if there were any objections, it would be useless. After all, this was the rules set by the Sword Sect. After knowing the process of the large competition, many young warriors began their final preparations. First was the first round. Because the rules did not say that they could not seek help, many young warriors began to look for companions. They were prepared to help each other in the first round. The first round of the large competition allowed teaming up. After entering the myriad demons plane, the proof that everyone passed was a token. Before the large competition began, the Sword Sect would place 10,000 tokens in the myriad demons plane. Those who obtained the tokens would be able to enter the second round. In other words, only 10,000 people could pass the first round. As for the token, the Sword Sect did not care. It did not matter if you found the tokens yourself, snatched them from the hands of demonic beasts, or snatched them from the hands of others. The Sword Sect did not care. They only cared about the final result. Those who obtained the tokens would be able to enter the second round. To put it bluntly, the first round was to screen out those who were not strong enough. After all, Xiao Chun had said that the Sword Sect's disciples had to be elites. Although they might not be the best among their peers, they definitely could not be existences without any talent. Lin Qing was very clear about Xiao Chun's requirements. That was why he set such a rule. Once the rule was announced, many young warriors who participated in the large recruitment competition immediately felt the pressure. Needless to say, the competition in the first round would probably be extremely intense. After all, more than 100,000 people were fighting for 10,000 tokens. The intensity of the competition could be imagined. However, there were also a small number of people who were unmoved. They were filled with confidence in their own strength and felt that they would definitely be able to break out of the encirclement. That's how it should be. If any Tom, Dick, or Harry can enter the Sword Sect, then your status as a disciple of the Sword Sect is too weak. That's right. However, I heard that the Sword Sect leader, Xiao Chun, will personally attend the large recruitment competition. However, he will be in the third round. So what? With our strength, do you think we won't be able to make it to the third round? Many young warriors were either worried, nervous, or secretly excited. This was because the news that Xiao Chun would personally attend the large recruitment competition had already spread. To these young warriors, Xiao Chun was their idol. Ever since Xiao Chun went to the Great Thousand World alone and became the sect leader of the Sword Sect, Xiao Chun's experience was simply like a legend. It was something that people talked about enthusiastically. It could be said that a large part of the reason why so many young warriors participated in the large recruitment competition this time was because of Xiao Chun's personal charm. Many young warriors looked up to Xiao Chun as their role model. As such, they naturally wanted to join the Sword Sect. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Early in the morning, many young warriors gathered at the foot of the Sword Sect. They were already prepared to enter the Demon's Plane. More than 100,000 young warriors were either in groups of 3 to 5 or resting with their eyes closed. They were all waiting for the large recruitment competition to begin. Soon, dozens of spatial cracks appeared in the sky amidst the crowd's discussion. Then, a total of 20 sword sect elders and 2 sword sect heads appeared in the sky. Naturally, Lin Qing could not personally attend the first round of the large recruitment competition. Therefore, the examiner for this round were the 2 sword sect heads of the sword sect. However, even in the face of 2 sword sect heads, many young warriors present did not dare to be impudent. Everyone knew that the sword sect heads of the sword sect were Dao realm experts. Ordinary elders were also Dao realm experts. For many young warriors present, such experts were existences that they could only look up to. Therefore, after the experts of the sword sect appeared, many young warriors present quieted down and looked at the sky without blinking. Faced with the crowd's gazes, the 2 sword sect heads of the sword sect had a thick sense of pride on their faces. Although the 2 sword sect heads were not the absolute upper echelons of the sword sect, in the outside world, their status as sword sect heads was enough to make many people not dare to underestimate them. This was all because of the strength of the sword sect. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22:18. With pride on their faces, the 2 sword chiefs scanned the hundreds of thousands of young warriors below. At this moment, they were indeed proud of the sword sect. It was precisely because the sword sect was powerful enough that the 2 sword sect chiefs could receive the respect of so many people. One of the white-haired old men cleared his throat and slowly spoke. With the support of spiritual energy, his voice was transmitted into the ears of everyone present. On behalf of the sword sect and the sect master, this old man welcomes everyone to participate in this recruitment competition. At the same time, I hope that everyone will be able to move forward courageously. The first round of the competition will begin. Without further ado, the 2 of them opened the entrance to the 10,000 demons plain at the same time as soon as the old man finished speaking. A door of light slowly appeared in front of everyone. This was the entrance to the demon's plain. After the entrance opened, the white-haired old man spoke again. The first round of the competition will last for 7 days. After 7 days, everyone will be restrained and sent out of the demon's plain. During this period, the sword sect will not interfere with anything that happens within the demon's plain. Therefore, the first round of the competition is life-threatening. If anyone wishes to withdraw, you may leave now. Think about it carefully. The entrance to the demon's plain will be closed in 2 hours. The first round of the competition was indeed life-threatening. Or rather, other than the third round, the first and second round of the competition were all life-threatening. This point required the young martial artists to weigh the pros and cons. If there were some who cherished their lives, then they could choose to leave and not participate in the recruitment competition. The Sword's Gate would not force them either. However, after hearing the white-haired old man's words, many young warriors present did not choose to withdraw. They were all warriors, so naturally, there would not be too many people who were afraid of death. This was because everyone knew that since they had stepped onto the martial path, they could only move forward courageously. Otherwise, they would only be annihilated by the masses. Especially for these young warriors, they had the spirit of newborn calves who were not afraid of tigers. Everyone had a dream in their hearts. They all dreamed of one day becoming a giant like the Sword Sect's sect master, Shao Chun, standing at the peak of the Great Thousand World and overlooking the world. Thus, under the momentum of their dreams, many young warriors quickly swarmed towards the demon's plain. In everyone's opinion, joining the Sword Sect was a step for them. If they could become a disciple of the Sword Sect, it might be enough to change their lives. Seeing that not many people chose to withdraw, the 2 sword chiefs in the sky revealed a faint smile. One of them spoke faintly. "Elder Lin, have you seen any good seedlings? There are a few, but we can't say for sure in the end. After all, this is only the first round of the competition." "That's true. However, I've heard that Lord Sectmaster is placing great importance on this recruitment competition. And I can't mess it up. That's for sure." This old man naturally won't disappoint the Sectmaster and Vice Sectmaster Lin Qing's trust. After many young warriors entered the demon's plane, some of the experts from the large clans took the initiative to visit the two sword chiefs. There was no lack of Dao realm experts among them. However, although they were both Dao realm experts, their identities were completely different. The sword chiefs of the sword sect were enough to make any Dao realm experts not dare to offend them. In the face of these experts from the large clans, the two sword chiefs were very calm. The white-haired elder who spoke earlier also spoke faintly. Everyone, it is indeed inconvenient for the two of us during the grand competition. I hope that everyone can understand. As for the outcome of the grand competition, everything will depend on the final token. Everyone, please be patient and wait for the results. Some of the experts from the large clans wanted to get close to the two sword chiefs. They even wanted to bribe the two sword chiefs to ensure that their juniors could pass the first round of the competition. Unfortunately, the two sword chiefs did not buy it. Naturally, the two of them did not dare to secretly manipulate the results of the first round of the competition. It should be known that not only Lin Qing, but even Xiao Chan placed great importance on this competition. If anyone dared to do anything in the competition, they would undoubtedly be courting death. After speaking, the two sword chiefs left. Although the experts from the large clans felt that it was a pity, they did not dare to say anything. They could only resentfully disperse and wait for the results of the first round of the competition. Many young warriors entered the demon's plane. For a moment, the demon's plane was bustling with noise and excitement. However, no one knew that when they entered the demon's plane, Xiao Chun, Qin Shu, and Long Qing, who were in the sword sect, were paying attention to the situation in the demon's plane. To be precise, Xiao Chun and the others were paying attention to Xiao Wan's situation. That's right, Xiao Wan's figure was mixed in with the crowd of young warriors. Xiao Wan also participated in this competition. This was also her own request. As she grew older, Xiao Wan no longer looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. Instead, she had grown into a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her appearance was fresh and beautiful. Her appearance was not inferior to her mother, Qin Shu, and the others. As Xiao Qin's daughter, Xiao Wan actually did not need to participate in this competition. However, Xiao Wan said that even though she was her father's daughter, she wanted to be like the others and start from the most ordinary sword sect disciple. She did not want to always rely on her father, Xiao Chun. Qin Shu and the other girls were worried about Xiao Chen's decision. However, Xiao Chan was very supportive of it. It could even be said that Xiao Chan was very pleased that Xiao Wan had such thoughts. At this moment, Xiao Wan was mixed in with the crowd on the light mirror. She had just passed through the entrance and was heading towards the depths of the myriad demons playing alone. Qin Shu and the other girls had long treated Xiao Wan as their own daughter. Among them, Gu Lingyao could not help but ask as she looked at Xiao Wan's back. "Husband, have you checked all the demonic beasts in the myriad demons plane? There are no existences above the immortal emperor realm, right? We can't let our guard down." The girls had asked this question many times. As this matter concerned Xiao Wan, they were naturally very attentive. They even personally went to Lin Qing and asked him to ensure that there were no demonic beasts above the immortal emperor realm in the myriad demons plane. After hearing Gu Lingyao's words, Xiao Chun helplessly smiled and said, "We have already checked countless times. Don't worry, Wan is not as weak as you think." He did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, after hearing Xiao Chen's words, Tian Yu directly said, "As her father, of course you don't have to worry. I have never seen you showing concern for Wan. Let me tell you, if Wan is in any danger, even if it means breaking the rules, I will intervene. Don't stop me at that time." Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. End of chapter. Chapter 2219. Qin Shu and the others doted on Wan to the extreme. Just as Tian Yu finished speaking, Xiao Qing and Bai Riyue also strode into the courtyard. Bai Riyue came to Xiao Chen's side and complained unhappily, "Chen how can you let Wan go to the demon's plane? What if something happens?" Obviously, Bai Riyue had heard that Xiao Wan was participating in the recruitment competition and came over to ask about it. Faced with his mother's complaint, Xiao Chun looked helplessly at his father, Xiao Qing. However, Xiao Qing also had a helpless expression on his face. There was no other way. Xiao Chun couldn't bring out his dignity as the sect master of the sword sect in front of his parents. He stood up and gave his seat to Bai Riyue. Then, he massaged Bai Riyue's shoulders and said softly, "Mother, don't worry. Mother, don't worry. Wan Wan is not as weak as you think. Nothing will happen to her. You think nothing will happen just because you say so? Chin'er, let me tell you. If anything happens to Wan Wan, I won't let you off." Bai Riyue had an expression that said, "I'll teach you a lesson." Seeing this, Xiao Chen nodded in agreement. Xiao Chen already knew that Bai Riyue doted on Wan Wan. However, he didn't expect that so many things would happen just because Wan Wan signed up for the recruitment competition. Bai Riyue was clearly anxious. In the end, even Qin Shiru and the others comforted her. They even pointed out Wan Wan's location in the light mirror to Bai Riyue. Bai Riyue was slightly relieved when she saw Wan Wan through the light mirror. However, due to the worry in her heart, Bai Riyue didn't go. She wanted to stay here and watch Wan Wan until the end of the first round of assessment. No matter what Xiao Chun said, Bai Riyue refused to listen. In the end, Xiao Chun had no choice but to accept his fate. Everyone stared at the light mirror, afraid that Wan Wan would be in danger. In this regard, Xiao Chun and Xiao Qing were helpless. They could only go to the side and drink by themselves. Xiao Qing could understand Xiao Chun. However, as women, Bai Riyue and the others obviously couldn't. They didn't care about anything else and only cared about Wan Wan's safety. Moreover, in the eyes of women like Bai Riyue, since Xiao was the sect master of the sword sect, there was no need for Wan Wan didn't need to participate in the recruitment competition. Wan didn't have nothing better to do. Wan was. Wan be a useless trash, only rely on herself. Was only relied on herself. On was. Wan was Wan with a trash to who was. In was Wan was in was Wan. S was in S's. Was Wan was the Wan was Wan be. Therefore, when Wan proposed to participate in the recruitment competition, Xiao Chun was in favor of it. He didn't even tell Lin Qing, so that Wan wouldn't receive any preferential treatment. He hoped that Wan would be able to complete the recruitment competition with her own strength and not rely on her own identity. That would be meaningless. All the women were worried about Wan. Xiao Chun and Xiao Qing were drinking silently at the side. Wan didn't know that so many people were looking at her. After entering the myriad demon's plane, she didn't team up with anyone and directly headed to the depths of the plane. In Wan's opinion, the closer one was to the core of the myriad demon's plane, the more tokens there would be. As long as she could snatch a token, she would be able to pass the first round of the assessment. Wan was already a big girl. As she traveled alone, a faint smile hung on the corner of her mouth. However, her expression gave people a feeling of stubbornness as she softly muttered to herself, this time I'll definitely give father a big surprise." As Wan grew older, she hoped more and more to gain Xiao Chen's approval. However, with such a heaven-defying father, it was indeed very difficult for Wan to surpass Xiao Chun. However, this was also part of Wan's unyielding character. This time, Wan took the initiative to participate in the recruitment competition because she wanted to impress Xiao Chun. She secretly swore that she would perform well this time and surprise her father. Wan held her breath and strode toward the depths of the myriad demon's plane. Along the way, Wan did encounter many attacks from demonic beasts. However, with Xiao Wan's current cultivation and combat strength, ordinary demonic beasts were basically no threat to her. Moreover, for this recruitment competition, some of the more powerful demonic beasts in the myriad demon's plane had already been wiped out by the experts of the sword sect. As Xiao Wan made her way to the core of the myriad demons plane, she finally encountered a perfected celestial emperor stage demonic beast. At a glance, she saw the token in the demonic beast's hand. Upon seeing this, Xiao Wan's eyes lit up. She immediately attacked the demonic beast. Since Xiao Wan's cultivation had already reached the perfected celestial emperor stage, it did not take her long to kill the demonic beast and successfully obtain the token. As soon as she entered the myriad demons plane, Xiao Wan obtained the token. With the token in her hand, an excited smile appeared on her face. She even waved her fist in the air. Bai Rua, Qin Shiru, and the others, who had been observing Xiao Wan through the light mirror, also smiled when they saw Xiao Wan successfully obtaining the token. However, at this moment, a group of young cultivators appeared in front of Xiao Wan. The leader of the group was dressed in a luxurious brocade robe. It was obvious that he was a disciple of a big family. When this group of people appeared in front of Xiao Wan, they involuntarily looked at the token in Xiao Wan's hand. Upon seeing this, Xiao Wan's eyes were filled with vigilance. She said with some displeasure, "What's the matter? Miss, we have no ill intentions and will not snatch the token. You can rest assured," the leader of the group said with a smile. At the same time, a hint of amazement flashed in his eyes when he looked at Xiao Wan. It was obvious that this young man was attracted to Xiao Wan. Xiao Wan was very beautiful. She was not inferior to Qin Shiru and the other ladies except that she was a little immature. His eyes were filled with admiration. When Xiao Wan was about to leave, the young man chased after her and said politely, "May I know your name, miss?" "I'm Qin Xian. There are many demonic beasts in the myriad demons plane. Since Miss is alone, why don't we travel together?" It was obvious that Qin Xian had feelings for Xiao Wan. However, Xiao Wan was not interested in this and said, "There's no need for that. I'm not used to being with unfamiliar people." Having said that, Xiao Wan disappeared from the spot in a flash. Qin Xian looked at Xiao Wan's departing figure and murmured reluctantly, "What a beautiful woman. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." In a chapter. Chapter 2220. The Qin family that Qin Xian was in was a large family with at least 3 end realm experts. Qin Xian was the only son of the current head of the Qin family and could be said to be the young master of the Qin family. He had shown great talent since he was young and was highly valued by the higher-ups of the Qin family. This time, they wanted Qin Xian to participate in the sword sect's recruitment competition. Firstly, the Qin family thought highly of the sword sect and wanted to use Qin Xian to enter the sword sect to form a relationship with the sword sect. Secondly, it was to train Qin Xian. One must know that although the Qin family was strong, it depended on who they were compared to. Compared to the sword sect, the Qin family was nothing. Therefore, it was normal for Qin Xian to enter the sword sect. Qin Xian had originally thought that this recruitment competition was just a formality for him. All along, Qin Xian had been very confident in his talent and combat strength. He believed that he would definitely succeed in this recruitment competition. So from the beginning to the end, Qin Xian actually didn't have much fighting spirit. Qin Xian originally thought that it would be a boring recruitment competition, but after seeing Xiao Wan, he didn't think so anymore. Since he was young, Qin Xian had seen many beauties. Even in the city where the Qin family was located, there were countless girls who liked Qin Xian. However, Qin Xian had never met a girl who could move his heart. After seeing Xiao Wan, Qin Xian admitted that he was moved. When he saw Xiao Wan for the first time, Qin Xian had a feeling that his heart was moved. He looked in the direction that Xiao Wan left in a daze. At the same time, the few young men who came with Qin Yuan went up and said, "Young master, do you want me to investigate this girl's identity?" "No need. You can't help me with this." Qin Xian smiled and rejected them. Although Qin Xian was a little arrogant, he wasn't bad overall. At least, he didn't bully others like the other disciples of big families. His reputation was not bad. As for his arrogance, there was nothing that could be done about it. After all, Qin Xian's family background and his own talent were all there. It would be strange if such a person did not have any arrogance. However, facing Xiao Wan, Qin Xin planned to use his own ability to pursue her. He didn't need to use any tricks. Of course, Qin Xin wouldn't use any tricks to pursue a woman, especially when it was his first time falling in love with a woman. As soon as Qin Xin finished speaking, he immediately chased after Xiao Wan without waiting for anyone to reply. Qin Xin had already made up his mind to pursue Xiao Wan and make her his woman. However, Xiao Wan was completely unaware of this. Since young, she had never been in close contact with any man other than Xiao Chun and Xiao Qing. Naturally, Xiao Wan knew nothing about relationships between men and women. Now that he had obtained his own token, Xiao Wan was no longer in a hurry. He strolled around leisurely as if he was on a scenic tour. As Xiao Wan strolled around the demon plain leisurely, he soon met 3 young martialists who were participating in the recruitment contest. The 3 of them blocked Xiao Wan's path. One of them even sneered, "Little beauty, are you alone? Why don't you join us?" Compared to Qin Xian, the 3 of them were obviously much easier to deal with. In response, Xiao Wan shouted coldly, "Get lost." Xiao Wan didn't have a good impression of the 3 of them. However, the 3 of them were unmoved by Xiao Wan's cold shout. They even laughed out loud. "Aha, you have a personality, but I like it." Xiao Wan was about to retaliate when a green light shot out from afar. Immediately, one of the men was hit by the green light and was sent flying. Xiao Wan was about to retaliate when Xiao Wan was about to retaliate. Someone made a move. The person who made the move was none other than Qin Xian. After sending one of them flying, Qin Xian appeared beside Xiao Wan. He looked at Xiao Wan with concern and asked, "How are you? Are you all right?" Qin Xian's attitude was completely different from the 3 of them. He was worried from the bottom of his heart. In response, Xiao Wan gently shook her head to indicate that she was fine. After confirming that Xiao Wan wasn't injured, Qin Xian turned to look at the remaining 2. At the same time, the 2 of them revealed a ferocious look and shouted, "Who are you? Are you courting death?" "Ha! Shameless boasting. How dare you say such words? I am Qin Xian from the Qin clan. Do you have the ability to fight? I would like to see who is courting death today." Qin Xian said nonchalantly. When the 2 of them heard this, their expressions changed. They had naturally heard of the Qin clan. Immediately, one of them asked in fear, "Qin clan? Which Qin clan? Which Qin clan did you say it was?" Qin Xian coldly laughed. Just the Qin clan alone was enough to make the 2 of them tremble in fear. Seeing this, Qin Xian couldn't be bothered to waste time with the 2 of them and immediately shouted, "Get lost." In response to Qin Xian's cold shout, the 2 of them didn't dare to stay any longer. They didn't dare to provoke the Qin clan. Immediately, they left with the person who was injured by Qin Xian. After the 3 of them left, Xiao Wan curiously looked at Qin Xian and asked, "Are they afraid of you?" Naturally, she could tell that Qin Xian's family wasn't simple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to scare the 3 of them away with just a few words. They didn't even dare to say a single word. However, Xiao Wan was merely curious. After all, no matter how extraordinary Qin Xian's family was, how could it be compared to her? One should know that Xiao Wan was the daughter of the sword sex leader, Xiao Chun. Seeing that Xiao Wan took the initiative to ask him, Qin Xian naturally didn't know what Xiao Wan was thinking. "It's nothing. It's just that my family has some power. I have dealt with trash like him since I was young." Qin Xian didn't hide his family background in front of Xiao Wan. However, in response to Qin Xian's words, Xiao Wan didn't have much of an expression. She remained calm and only said a few words. "Thank you." Regardless of whether it was necessary, Qin Xian had helped her. Therefore, Xiao Wan still thanked him. However, Qin Xian naturally wasn't satisfied with this. Seeing that Xiao Wan was about to leave, Qin Xian hurriedly followed up. "I still don't know your name." "Xiao Wan." Hearing this, Xiao Wan didn't hide her name this time and told Qin Xian her name. After hearing Xiao Wan's words, Qin Xian didn't think too much about it. He didn't even think about Xiao Chun. After all, there were so many people with the surname Xiao in the Great Thousand World. Qin Xian, who had been following Xiao Wan, invited her enthusiastically. "Xiao Wan, why don't we travel together? This way, we could take care of each other. Don't worry, if you encounter any danger, I will definitely protect you. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 22-21. Qin Xian was like a dogskin plaster that stuck to Xiao Wan. Xiao Wan's attitude towards him was neither warm nor cold. Xiao Wan didn't like Qin Xian at all. Although Qin Xian could be considered a genius, it wasn't enough to catch Xiao Wan's attention. Xiao Wan had known a lot of people since she was young. Not to mention her father, Xiao Chun. There were many disciples in the sword sect that didn't belong to Qin Xian. In terms of talent, Qin Xian wasn't considered the top in the sword sect. Therefore, Xiao Wan naturally wouldn't treat Qin Xian differently like other women. It was the first time he met such a woman. However, the colder Xiao Wan was, the more Qin Xian wanted to attract her attention. The two walked side by side. Behind them, Qin Xian's companions followed closely. Along the way, Qin Xian took good care of Xiao Wan and didn't do anything out of the ordinary. However, Qin Xian didn't know that his every move was being watched by several pairs of eyes. Through the mirror, Qin Shu and the other women, as well as by Riyue, saw Qin Xian and frowned. As experienced people, how could they not know that Qin Xian wanted to pursue Xiao Wan? However, Xiao Wan was the little princess of the Xiao clan. Qin Shu and the other women wouldn't be careless about Xiao Wan's marriage. Qin Shuru's eyes flashed with a strange light. Soon, she summoned a Swords Gate elder, pointed at Qin Xian on the mirror, and said, "Investigate this person's identity." However, when he saw Xiao Wan on the mirror, he was slightly taken aback and looked at Xiao Chun in surprise. "Xiao Wan, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right." The elder didn't know that Xiao Wan was also participating in the recruitment. However, since Xiao Chun didn't mention it, it was obvious that he didn't want too many people to know. Therefore, the elder naturally understood what he meant. After being stunned for a moment, the elder quickly left the courtyard and began to investigate Qin Xian's background. It was not difficult for the sword sect to investigate a person. Therefore, in just an hour, all of Qin Xian's information was presented to Qin Shu and the other girls. Qin Shu and the other women frowned as they read the detailed records of Qin Xian's childhood. Hong Xiu even said indifferently, "The Qin family? A disciple of a small family?" The Qin family, which everyone thought was powerful, was just a small family in Hong Xiu's eyes. This was normal. After all, with Hong Xiu's status, she naturally looked down on the Qin family. The young master of the Qin clan was naturally not worthy of Xiao Wan. As soon as he finished speaking, the girls couldn't help but look at Xiao Chun. After all, this kind of matter still depended on Xiao Chen's opinion. Faced with the girls' gazes, Xiao Chun, who was drinking with Xiao Qing, said helplessly, "We don't have to care about children's matters. Let them settle it themselves." Wan is no longer a child. Xiao Chen naturally saw Qin Xian's admiration for Xiao Wan. However, Xiao Chen didn't care too much about it. Moreover, Qin Xian hadn't done anything out of line, so Xiao Chun naturally didn't want to care about it. Seeing Xiao Chen's indifference, Qin Shu and the other women rolled their eyes at him. Then, the girls gathered together and discussed various matters regarding Qin Xian. Qin Xian obviously didn't know that all of his information had been placed in front of Qin Shu and the other women. He also didn't know that the family background he was proud of was not worth mentioning in the eyes of Qin Shu and the other women. In the Demon's Plain, everything went smoothly. Xiao Wan had already obtained the token, and the rest of the time was obviously more relaxed. 3 days later, Qin Xian and the rest had also obtained their tokens. Everyone found a place to rest and prepared to wait for the end of the first round of the grand competition. Qin Xian and Xiao Wan sat around a fire by a lake. To be precise, Qin Xian had been pestering Xiao Wan. He even specially hunted a demonic beast and barbecued it for Xiao Wan. The dignified young master of the Qin clan actually barbecued meat for a woman. If this news were to spread to the Qin clan, many people's jaws would drop. However, Xiao Wan didn't seem to be excited at all. She still appeared cold. Perhaps he was used to Xiao Wan's attitude, so Qin Xian didn't mind at all. He still enjoyed it. They waited idly for the end of the first round of the grand competition. In the next few days, Xiao Wan and the rest didn't encounter any danger. However, as time passed, the competition in the Demon's Plain became more intense. Many of the young warriors who participated in the recruitment competition also fought, and there were even cases of deaths. Of course, this was nothing strange. Moreover, at the beginning, the Swords Gate had already said that there would definitely be deaths in this recruitment competition. There were only 10,000 tokens in total. However, there were more than 100,000 warriors who participated in the grand competition. There were too many monks and too little meat. Naturally, competition was unavoidable. Even Xiao Wan and the rest encountered a few fights. However, Qin Xian was always there to protect them. This guy wasn't bad. He said that he would protect Xiao Wan, and he did it. In fact, with Qin Xian's strength, he was already considered a top-notch existence among the warriors who participated in the grand competition. In addition to his reputation as the young master of the Qin clan, there weren't many who dared to provoke him. With Qin Xian's protection, Xiao Wan didn't encounter any danger. He didn't even need to fight. As such, 7 days passed quickly. Everyone left the Demon's Plain. Among them, those who obtained tokens were naturally overjoyed. As for those who didn't obtain tokens, they chose to leave dejectedly. Outside the Demon's Plain, the two Sword Sect elders from 7 days ago appeared again and announced that the second round of the grand competition would be held in 3 days. As such, those who obtained tokens and passed the first round were given 3 days to rest. Regarding this, Qin Xian invited Xiao Wan warmly. Xiao Wan, where do you live? Why don't you follow me to the East Sword City? My clan has a villa there. Around the Sword Sect, there are 4 newly built cities. The East Sword City was one of them. As the Qin clan was a big clan in the Great Thousand World, it wasn't strange for them to have a villa in the East Sword City. Faced with Qin Xian's invitation, Xiao Wan thought about it and agreed. It had been a long time since Xiao Wan went out to play. Xiao Wan naturally didn't want to go back. Furthermore, Xiao Chun had promised that he wouldn't restrict Xiao Wan's freedom in this grand competition. As such, Xiao Wan naturally seized the opportunity to play, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22-22. Qin Xian was overjoyed to see Xiao Wan nodding in agreement. She immediately brought Xiao Wan to the East Sword City. Qin Xian was elated to see Xiao Wan nodding in agreement. She immediately brought Xiao Wan to the East Sword City. Xiao Wan wanted to go out and have some fun. Qin Shu and the other ladies who had been paying attention to her couldn't stand it. They came to Xiao Chen's side and spoke at once. Hubby, Wan is going to the East Sword City. Aren't you going to take care of her? It was apparent that Qin Shu and the other ladies weren't willing to let Xiao Wan go to the East Sword City. They didn't want Xiao Wan to stay in the Qin family. After all, in their eyes, how could the young master of the Qin family be worthy of Wan? However, Xiao Chun forced a smile. All right, Wan isn't a child anymore. Besides, I've promised her that I won't restrict her freedom during the competition. You can't expect me to go back on my words, right? Xiao Chun wasn't worried about Xiao Wan's safety at all. What a joke. Would anything happen to her at her own home? Then the Sword Sect would really live up to its reputation. Xiao Chun didn't mind at all. Qin Shu and the other ladies rolled their eyes at Xiao Chun. Then, they ignored Xiao Chun and went to the side to have a discussion. Xiao Chun didn't know what Qin Shu and the other ladies were discussing. He let out a helpless sigh and muttered under his breath. Sigh, what a loving mother. Wasn't your mother like this when you were young? Xiao Qing scolded with a smile. Qin Shu and the other ladies were unusually nervous about Wan. Wasn't Bai Ruyue the same when Xiao Chun was young? All mothers in the world were the same. Hearing his father's words, Xiao Chun didn't refute. Forget it, let them be. Anyway, with how nervous they were about Wan, Xiao Chun knew that no matter what he said, they wouldn't listen. While the ladies were worried about Xiao Wan had already arrived at Eastern Sword City under Qin Xian's lead. Xiao Wan was naturally familiar with Eastern Sword City. She had followed her mothers here many times. It could be said that Xiao Wan was much more familiar with Eastern Sword City than Qin Xian. Once she entered East Sword City, Xiao Wan quickly walked into the city according to her memory. She remembered that there was a shop in East Sword City that sold Tonghulu that was especially delicious. Last time, second Mother Hunter Flower Fairy had bought it for Xiao Wan. Not knowing where Xiao Wan was going, Qin Xian naturally followed closely behind. However, a young man beside him whispered to Qin Xian, "Young master, is it appropriate for us to bring her home? After all, the Qin family isn't a place where just anyone can enter." Admittedly, Xiao Wan was very beautiful. However, it was inappropriate for Qin Xian to bring her home just because of that. After all, the Qin family wasn't a place where just anyone could enter. Hearing this, Qin Xian's expression darkened. "It's not up to you to interfere in my matters." He knew what this person meant. However, after interacting with Xiao Wan for a few days, Qin Xian discovered that he had indeed fallen in love with this woman. Not only because of Xiao Wan's appearance, but also because of Xiao Wan's personality and the feeling she gave him. He had never felt this way before. Qin Xian was certain that he had truly fallen in love with Xiao Wan. With a low shout, Qin Xian hurriedly chased after Xiao Wan. Following which, the two of them passed through the main street and arrived at a small alley. Just as they entered the alley, they saw a Tonghulu shop. The shop wasn't big. It could even be said that it was very small. However, seeing this shop, Xiao Wan happily ran up and said to the old man selling Tonghulu, "Grandpa, I want 2 Tonghulu skewers." This old man didn't have any cultivation. He was just an ordinary person. However, the Tonghulu he made tasted amazing. At the very least, Xiao Wan liked it very much. The old man gave off a very kind feeling. When he heard Xiao Wan's request, he smiled and said, "Okay." Soon, he passed 2 Tonghulu skewers to Xiao Wan and said, "Little girl, why didn't your mother come with you this time?" It was obvious that the old man still remembered Xiao Wan. It couldn't be helped. Both mother and daughter were extremely beautiful. It was indeed difficult for people to forget them. Xiao Wan took the Tonghulu skewers and said with a smile, "Second mother is at home. I came alone this time." After saying that, she waved her hand at the old man and left. Following which, she brought the Tonghulu skewers to Qin Xian and handed one to him. "Try it. The Tonghulu skewers here are pretty good. Mother brought me here to eat it last time. I really liked it." After spending a few days with Qin Xian, the two of them gradually became familiar with each other. However, Xiao Wan didn't have any feelings for Qin Xian. Perhaps it could be said that Xiao Wan's personality was the same as Xiao Chen's. They belonged to the type of people who didn't care about anything. Until now, Xiao Wan still didn't feel any feelings for Qin Xian. She only treated Qin Xian as an ordinary friend. The reason why she gave Qin Xian a Tonghulu skewers was because she treated him as a friend. However, Qin Xian didn't think so. After receiving the Tonghulu skewers from Xiao Wan, Qin Xian immediately said happily, "Okay, I'll try it." Looking at the happy smile on Xiao Wan's face and the 2 dimples on her cheeks, Qin Xian was stunned for a moment. As he ate the Tonghulu skewers, he strolled around the city with Xiao Wan. Qin Xian admitted that he liked to be with Xiao Wan. No matter what he did, as long as he was with Xiao Wan, he would feel very happy. The two of them strolled around the Eastern Sword City. When they saw that the sky was gradually darkening, Qin Xian also suggested that they return. With regards to this, Xiao Wan did not say anything. Under Qin Xian's strong invitation, she followed him to the Qin clan's other courtyard. The Qin family's courtyard in the East Sword City wasn't small. The location was also quite good. From this, one could see the Qin family's wealth. After all, the houses in the East Sword City weren't cheap. This was especially so for a courtyard with such a good location and size. The price was even higher. Moreover, this was only one of the Qin family's courtyards. However, Xiao Wan didn't care about this. She naturally followed Qin Xian into the courtyard. However, just as they arrived at the front courtyard, they saw a middle-aged man walking towards them. When Qin Xian saw this middle-aged man, he opened his mouth and called out, "Second uncle." This person was Qin Xian's second uncle. This time, he had specially accompanied Qin Xian to the sword sect to participate in the recruitment competition. When he heard Qin Xian's words, his second uncle nodded his head slightly, after which he turned his gaze toward Xiao Wan and said with some displeasure, "Xian, who is she?" "Second uncle, she is my friend. Her name is Xiao Wan." When Qin Xian heard this, he smiled and said. Seeing this, Xiao Wan also politely greeted him. However, Qin Xian's second uncle ignored Xiao Wan's politeness. At the same time, he said to Qin Xian with some displeasure, "Xian, it's not that I want to nag you, but you should know that we have important matters to attend to in the Sword Mansion. This isn't the time to talk about love. Moreover, you should know the rules of the family. Not just anyone can be brought home. If your father finds out, he will definitely beat you up." Chapter 22-23. Qin Xian's second uncle clearly didn't like Xiao Wan. In his opinion, Qin Xian shouldn't be focusing on a woman right now. Instead, he should be focusing on preparing for the recruitment competition, especially in the third round. It would be best if he could obtain a good result. Qin Xian's second uncle clearly didn't like Xiao Wan. In his opinion, Qin Xian shouldn't be focusing on a woman right now. Instead, he should be focusing on preparing for the recruitment competition, especially in the third round. It would be best if he could obtain a good result. It was undeniable that Xiao Wan was very beautiful. But so what? There were so many beauties in the world. As the young master of the Qin clan, how could he ruin his plans for a woman? In front of Xiao Wan, Qin Xian's second uncle didn't show any mercy. His words were also extremely unpleasant. Hearing this, Qin Xian immediately said with some displeasure, "Second uncle, what are you saying? Xiao Wan is my friend. It's not what you think. I don't care. You have to know your mission as the young master of the Qin clan. In addition, you have to know that since you're the young master of the Qin clan, not just anyone can be your woman in the future. After all, she is the mistress of the Qin clan." Qin Xian's second uncle didn't back down. It was obvious that Qin Xian's second uncle treated Xiao Wan as an ordinary person without any background. Qin Xian still wanted to say something, but Xiao Wan spoke first. "Qin Xian, I think I should go back. By the way, thank you for playing with me today. I'm very happy." Although Xiao Wan was a little insensitive like Xiao Chun, she wasn't a fool. Since Qin Xian's second uncle was so obvious, Xiao Wan naturally felt that he didn't welcome her. Since that was the case, Xiao Wan naturally wouldn't ask for a rebuff. Moreover, to be honest, Xiao Wan wasn't very interested in the Qin clan. She didn't have any intention of climbing up the social ladder of the Qin clan. What a joke. As the little princess of the sword sect, did Xiao Wan need to climb up the social ladder of the Qin clan? She wondered what Qin Xian's second uncle would think if he knew Xiao Wan's identity. Would he regret what he did today? It was obviously a good opportunity to form a relationship with the sword sect. If Qin Xian could have a relationship with Xiao Wan, it would be much better than Qin Xian joining the sword sect. Unfortunately, Qin Xian's second uncle had destroyed this possibility. However, Xiao Wan wasn't angry. At the same time, he didn't want to use his power to bully others. Under the guidance of Xiao Chun, Xiao Wan never used his family background to bully others. Xiao Wan had never done such a thing. This time, Xiao Wan did not give Qin Xian a chance to speak. He turned around and left. Seeing this, Qin Xian glanced at his second uncle in displeasure. However, he did not say anything. After all, the other party was his elder. He quickly chased after Xiao Wan. When Qin Xian arrived at the entrance of the Qin residence, he caught up with Xiao Wan. Looking at Xiao Wan's calm expression, Qin Xian didn't know if she was angry. "Xiao Wan, I'm sorry. I think my second uncle might have misunderstood something." "It's fine, Xiao Wan smiled. She didn't take this matter to heart. But before Xiao Wan finished her sentence, she heard a pleasant voice calling out to her from afar. "Luan Luan." Looking in the direction of the voice, Qin Xian saw a beautiful woman in a purple dress walking over leisurely. At first glance, Qin Xian was stunned on the spot. It was the first time he saw such a beautiful woman in this world. She was so beautiful that it gave people a surreal feeling. While Qin Xian was in a daze, Xiao Wan ran toward the beautiful woman in the purple dress and called out happily, "Second mother, why are you here?" The woman was none other than Hundred Flower Fairy. After a round of discussion, they decided that they couldn't let Xiao Wan spend the night in the Qin residence, so Hundred Flower Fairy personally came to East Sword City. It was fortunate that Bai Hua Fairy had arrived a little late. Otherwise, if she had seen how Qin Xian's second uncle looked down on Xiao Wan, the Qin clan would have faced the wrath of the Swords Gate matriarch. Xiao Wan jumped into Hundred Flower Fairy's embrace happily. Hundred Flower Fairy caressed Xiao Wan's head affectionately and scolded with a smile. "You're not home all day and only know how to run around. Do you know how worried your mothers are about you? They asked me to come pick you up." "Second mother." Xiao Wan revealed a pitiful look after being scolded by Hundred Flower Fairy. Hundred Flower Fairy smiled helplessly. "All right, you mischievous girl. Let's go home." Since Hundred Flower Fairy had personally come to East Sword City, Xiao Wan naturally had to return home. In response, Xiao Wan could only nod his head unwillingly. However, before he left, Xiao Wan turned his head and waved goodbye to Qin Xian. "Qin Xian, see you in the second round of the grand competition." After saying that, she disappeared into the crowd under Hundred Flower Fairy's lead. From the beginning to the end, Hundred Flower Fairy didn't even look at Qin Xian. Apparently, he was completely ignored. With Hundred Flower Fairy's status, it was natural that she wouldn't care about a mere young master of the Qin family. Even if the Qin family's ancestor came, Hundred Flower Fairy wouldn't even give him a second glance. After watching Hundred Flower Fairy and Xiao Wan leave, Qin Xian finally murmured after a long while, "Is that Xiao Wan's mother?" From Hundred Flower Fairy, other than her beautiful appearance, what touched Qin Xian the most was the temperament that Hundred Flower Fairy unconsciously exuded. It was a temperament that belonged to someone who had been in a high position for a long time. Such a temperament made Qin Xian not dare to look directly at Hundred Flower Fairy, as if she was the queen of the heavens. At the same time, Hundred Flower Fairy also made Qin Xian feel a great pressure. This pressure had nothing to do with cultivation. Moreover, Qin Xian had never felt this kind of pressure even from his own father. Unaware of Qin Xian's thoughts, after following Hundred Flower Fairy back to the Sword Sect, Xiao Wan was naturally taught a lesson by Qin Shru and the other girls. The girls all loved their daughter dearly. In the end, it was Xiao Chun who spoke up, allowing Xiao Wan to escape. In the next few days, Xiao Wan was naturally unable to leave the Sword Sect. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today, it was time for the second round of the competition. After the first round of eliminations, the number of people in the second round was obviously much lower. There were only a mere 10,000 people. Furthermore, for the second round of the grand competition, Swords Gate had built a battle arena in a separate small world for the second round of the grand competition. The participants would be fighting there for the second round of the grand competition. Qin Xian and Qin Xian's second uncle entered the pocket dimension. Qin Xian's second uncle went directly to the spectator seats. However, wherever he went, many people would take the initiative to greet him. Although the Qin clan's power and influence could not be compared to the Sword Sect, it was still not something that those small factions could compare to. Qin Xian's second uncle smiled and nodded in response to everyone's compliments. Then, he went to a seat closer to the front and sat down, waiting for the competition to begin. Chapter 22-24. The second round of the competition was also conducted in the form of a single elimination tournament, but it was a battle of life and death. The second round of the competition was also conducted in the form of a single elimination tournament, but it was a battle of life and death. 10,000 Katian sect disciples who had committed a capital offense had already been selected. Of course, their cultivation levels were also selected, and they were basically at the same level as the young martial artists who were participating in the recruitment competition this time. Because of this, spectators were allowed to watch the second round of the competition. For example, Qin Xian's second uncle, Many of the family elders who had followed these young martial artists to participate in the recruitment competition also came to the spectator seats and took their seats. With the identity of Qin Xian's second uncle, he was naturally respected and flattered by many people. However, his seat was not in the first row, but in the second row. As for the first row, it was reserved for the elders of the sword sect. Even with the identity of Qin Xian's second uncle, it was naturally impossible for him to be on equal footing with the elders of the sword sect. Moreover, it was said that vice sect leader Lin Qing would personally host the second round of the competition. Although Lin Qing was only one of the vice sect leaders of the sword sect, he held great power. It was no exaggeration to say that the power of any of the vice sect leaders of the sword sect was definitely much greater than the so-called Qin clan's patriarch. Therefore, everyone was looking forward to vice sect leader Lin Qing personally hosting the second round of the competition. After all, he was the vice sect leader of the sword sect. Everyone would be satisfied if they could exchange a few words with him. The spectator seats were already packed. Below, in the preparation area, the 10,000 young martial artists who had passed the first round of the competition were already preparing. Everyone knew that their opponents were the disciples of the Katian sect. Although they might be the lowest outer court disciples of the Katian sect, they were not to be underestimated. After all, the Katian sect was once one of the 10 great Lingtian sects. Their disciples were obviously not a bunch of good-for-nothings. Lin Qing's idea of using the disciples of the heavenly sect to test the new disciples was indeed a good idea, because in this way, it would prove that the new disciples of the sword sect were obviously stronger than those of the heavenly sect. As for the word cruel, it was simply a joke. The winner was king, while the loser was in the wrong. Since the heavenly sect had lost, wouldn't their disciples be at the mercy of the sword's gate? Therefore, there was nothing cruel about it. Furthermore, the hands of these heavenly sect disciples were also stained with the blood of the sword's gate disciples. While they were preparing for the upcoming battle, Qin Xian anxiously searched for Xiao Wan's figure. After searching for a while, Qin Xian saw Xiao Wan and immediately went up to greet her happily. "Xiao Wan," Qin Xian called out with a smile. Upon hearing Qin Xian's voice, Xiao Wan waved her hand. However, just as the two of them greeted each other, an extremely untimely voice interrupted the conversation between the two of them. "Yo, Qin Xian, which family's young lady are you trying to trick this time?" The voice was filled with thick mockery. Qin Xian turned to the voice and saw a young man dressed in luxurious clothes striding toward him. Qin Xian immediately snapped at the young man. "Zhang Xian, are you trying to pick a fight?" It was apparent that Qin Xian knew Zhang Xian, and their relationship didn't seem to be harmonious. In fact, the Zhang family that Zhang Xian belonged to was also a large family. In terms of strength, it wasn't much weaker than the Qin family. Moreover, the Qin family and the Zhang family weren't far apart, and there had always been conflicts between the two families. Therefore, as the young masters of the two families and geniuses with extraordinary talents, Qin Xian and Zhang Xian had always disliked each other since they were young. Qin Xian knew that Zhang Xian was participating in the sword sect's recruitment competition, which was why he wasn't surprised to see Zhang Xian here. However, it wasn't easy for Qin Xian to speak to Xiao Wan, and Zhang Xian came over to mess things up. This made Qin Xian extremely unhappy. As expected, the smile on Xiao Wan's face quickly disappeared upon seeing Zhang Xian. She said to Qin Xian indifferently, "I'll be leaving first." She didn't wait for Qin Xian's reply and left immediately. Qin Xian was inwardly vexed as he gazed at Zhang Xian's back view. Don't pick a fight for no reason. Then, he turned around and left. This wasn't the place to make a move. After all, Qin Xian was in the sword sect, and he didn't dare to provoke the sword sect's prestige. Qin Xian and Xiao Wan left. However, Zhang Xian didn't care about this at all. He only looked at Xiao Wan's back view and revealed a faint smile. "What a beautiful lady. Qin Xian, it seems like I'll have to snatch her away again." Xiao wanted to know what Zhang Xian was thinking. Even if she knew, she probably wouldn't care. With Xiao Wan's status, if Zhang Xian dared to do anything out of line, the entire Zhang family would be buried with him. Therefore, if Zhang Xian had some self-awareness, he wouldn't have done something that he shouldn't have. Zhang Xian's appearance didn't affect Xiao Wan at all. Although Qin Xian still wanted to look for Xiao Wan, he gave up on the idea after some thought. He could only curse Zhang Xian in his heart. Zhang Xian's appearance was only a small interlude. Very quickly, the second round of the competition began. There were a total of 10 stages according to their respective numbers, and the competition would be held in all 10 stages at the same time. One by one, the young martial artists whose names were called stepped onto the battle ring and began the second round of the competition. Compared to the first round, the second round of the competition was obviously more dangerous because the disciples of the heavenly sect wouldn't hold back. They would use their killing moves as soon as they attacked. It was either life or death. Therefore, as soon as the competition began, there were already people who fell. Of course, there were also disciples of the heavenly sect who were killed. But no matter what, the second round of the competition was obviously more brutal than the first. Battle after battle continued. While the battles were going on the seventh arena, a battle had just ended. When the referee, who was acting as the referee, glanced at the name list, he was stunned. This was because the name list stated that the next participant was Xiao Wan. The judge knew who Xiao Wan was. She was the daughter of the sect leader. But, taken aback, the deacon instinctively called out, "Xiao Wan." Hearing her name, Xiao Wan strode onto stage 7. However, when Xiao Wan appeared on stage 7, Lin Qing, who was sitting on the main seat, stood up abruptly. When he saw Xiao Wan on stage 7, Lin Qing exclaimed in surprise. Miss. Lin Qing was obviously shocked by Xiao Wan's appearance. Not only him, but the surrounding elders of Swords Gate were also dumbfounded at this moment. Please add me to your collection. Please recommend me. End of chapter. Chapter 22-25. Xiao Wan's appearance made Lin Qing and the other experts of the Sword sect extremely nervous. They were very clear about Xiao Wan's identity. She was the apple of Xiao Chen's eye. If anything were to happen to her, Xiao Chen would definitely skin them alive. Xiao Wan's appearance made Lin Qing and the other experts of the Sword sect extremely nervous. They were very clear about Xiao Wan's identity. She was the apple of Xiao Chen's eye. If anything were to happen to her, Xiao Chen would definitely skin them alive. They didn't dare to be careless. Lin Qing even had the thought of stopping the competition. However, just as Lin Qing was hesitating, a golden light from a sound transmission talisman entered the space between Lin Qing's eyebrows. The sound transmission talisman was sent by Xiao Chen. The content was very simple. It was just a single sentence. It was clear that he didn't want Xiao Wan to affect the recruitment competition. At the same time, he didn't want Xiao Wan's identity to be exposed. He also didn't want Lin Qing to give Xiao Wan any preferential treatment because of her identity. After receiving Xiao Chen's message, Lin Qing quickly understood Xiao Chen's intentions. It was clear that Xiao Chen wanted to train Xiao Wan. Lin Qing could only forcefully suppress the worry in his heart. He nodded slightly at the deacon on the 7th arena. Seeing this, the deacon ordered the disciples of the heavenly sect to enter the arena. Lin Qing completely obeyed Xiao Chen's orders. However, his eyes were still fixed on the 7th arena. Although Xiao Chen's intentions were very clear, Lin Qing naturally didn't dare to be careless. He couldn't let anything happen to Xiao Wan. Therefore, he had been paying attention to every movement on the 7th arena. It would be best if Xiao Wan could win. However, if Xiao Wan was in danger, Lin Qing would definitely save her immediately. Lin Qing was secretly observing everything that was happening in the 7th arena. As for the Swords Gate Elder's strange behavior, not many people noticed it. After all, Lin Qing and the others were very good at concealing themselves. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see through them. Under Lin Qing's secret observation, a heavenly sect disciple was brought up to the 7th arena. Obviously, he already knew that he was going to die. Therefore, when he looked at Xiao Wan, this heavenly sect disciple did not have the slightest hesitation. In any case, it was better to drag someone down with him. Looking at Xiao Wan without restraint, this heavenly gate disciple sneered. Tis Tiska, little beauty. Seems like my luck is not bad, to be able to have a beauty as a companion before I die. In the face of a predestined outcome, many disciples of the heavenly sect had nothing to fear, so they naturally had nothing to be afraid of. An icy glint gradually surfaced in Xiao Wan's eyes when she saw the heavenly coiling sect's disciple brazenly sizing her up. Because of Xiao Chun, Xiao Wan did not have a good impression of the heavenly coiling sect. Naturally, Xiao Wan would not feel any pity for this heavenly coiling sect's disciple. After removing the seal on the heavenly sect's disciple's cultivation, the aura of a perfected celestial emperor instantly soared into the sky. His cultivation was at the same level as Xiao Wan. With a sneer, the heavenly sect's disciple did not give Xiao Wan any time to prepare. Without hesitation, he attacked Xiao Wan. His eyes were brimming with killing intent as he said, "Die." Xiao Wan's expression did not change in the face of the heavenly sect's disciple's attack. She tilted her body and dodged the attack. At the same time, a long sword appeared in her hand from her storage ring. This long sword was given to Xiao Wan by Xiao Chun. It was extraordinary. With the long sword in hand, Xiao Wan's aura became even sharper. She slashed out with the sword and shouted coldly, "Green Lotus Sword Chi." Following Xiao Wan's shout, a green sword ray shot towards the heavenly sect's disciple at lightning speed. The Green Lotus Sword Chi was Xiao Chen's signature celestial skill. Naturally, he had imparted it to Xiao Wan. Moreover, Xiao Wan had long cultivated the Green Lotus Sword Chi to the perfected stage. When the terrifying green sword ray flashed out, the heavenly sect's disciple's eyes turned solemn. However, he did not choose to dodge the attack. Instead, he chose to take it head-on. Once again, he threw out a punch. Similarly, he also used his signature celestial skill. Both of them collided violently. In the end, the heavenly sect's disciple was sent flying. The outcome of the collision was obvious. It was clear that Xiao Wan was stronger. Lin Qing, who was sitting on the main seat, heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this. Since Xiao Wan was stronger than the heavenly sect's disciple, as long as Xiao Wan did not underestimate her opponent, she should not be in any danger. After being sent flying by Xiao Wan's sword, before the heavenly sect's disciple could regain his balance, Xiao Wan immediately executed the absolute Yin movement technique. She did not give the heavenly sect's disciple any time to react. She quickly caught up with the heavenly sect's disciple and did not show any mercy. Xiao Wan continuously slashed out 3 times. Facing Xiao Wan's attack, the heavenly sect's disciple tried his best to resist. Unfortunately, he was not strong enough and was killed by Xiao Wan in the end. The outcome of the battle had been determined. Xiao Wan's performance naturally attracted the attention of many people, including Qin Xian's second uncle. Qin Xian's second uncle naturally knew Xiao Wan. They had just met 3 days ago. However, at that time, Qin Xian's second uncle thought that Xiao Wan was not worthy of Qin Xian. Therefore, he did not show any mercy. However, looking at it now, Xiao Wan's strength was already extraordinary. I wonder what her family background is like. If she is from an ordinary family, she is still not worthy of Qin Xian. Qin Xian's second uncle thought inwardly. As such, Qin Xian's second uncle could not help but take another look at Xiao Wan. He still thought that Xiao Wan was not worthy of Qin Xian. However, Qin Xian's second uncle had never thought that it was not Xiao Wan who was not worthy of Qin Xian. Instead, it was Qin Xian who was worthy of Xiao Wan. In terms of family background, Xiao Wan was simply miles ahead of Qin Xian. After the battle ended, the deacon of the 7th arena let out a sigh of relief. At least Xiao Wan did not suffer any injuries. He immediately announced the result. Xiao Wan had successfully passed the second round of the competition by killing his opponent. It could be said that Xiao Wan had successfully joined the sword sect with his own strength. However, Xiao Wan's goal was obviously not limited to this. If he wanted his father, Xiao Chun, to have a whole new level of respect for him, Xiao Wan would need to achieve a good result in the 3rd round of the competition. It would be best if he could come out on top. Moreover, Xiao Chan would be there in person for the third round of the competition. Xiao Wan was even more reluctant to embarrass himself in front of his father. Otherwise, all the bold words he had said back then would become a joke. He must achieve a good result in the third round of the competition. With this thought in mind, Xiao Wan walked down from the arena with a calm expression. He did not seem to be excited about passing the second round of the competition. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. In a chapter. Chapter 22-26. Xiao Wan easily defeated her opponent and walked down the stage. Xiao Wan was about to leave, but after taking a few steps, Qin Xian, who had also just finished his battle, came looking for her. Xiao Wan easily defeated her opponent and walked down the stage. Xiao Wan was about to leave, but after taking a few steps, Qin Xian, who had also just finished his battle, came looking for her. Qin Xian had also defeated his opponent. With Qin Xian's strength, this wasn't surprising. After all, the Qin clan had spent a lot of effort on Qin Xian since he was young. Therefore, it wasn't too difficult for him to defeat an ordinary heavenly sect outer disciple. After the battle, Qin Xian hurriedly came looking for Xiao Wan. With a smile on his face, he said, "Xiao Wan, congratulations. Now we are brothers and sisters." Qin Xian was really happy that Xiao Wan had successfully passed the second round of the competition. This way, he could enter the sword sect with Xiao Wan. In the future, they would all be disciples of the sword sect and would be brothers and sisters. As the saying goes, the pavilion closest to the water enjoys the moonlight first. Since they were both disciples of the sword sect, Qin Xian's chances of wooing Xiao Wan were obviously much higher. However, Xiao Wan wasn't too excited in the face of Qin Xian's congratulations. She only said indifferently, "Didn't you win too?" Hearing Xiao Wan's words, Qin Xian smiled and invited Xiao Wan to the East Sword City again. However, this time, Xiao Wan rejected. Previously, when they went to the East Sword City, Qin Shiru's second uncle's attitude had already made everything clear. Xiao Wan naturally wouldn't ask for a rebuff. Moreover, after being brought home by her second mother, 100 Flower Fairy, Qin Shiru and the other girls didn't allow Xiao Wan to go out alone. Xiao Wan was helpless about this. Qin Xian was a little disappointed and felt a little guilty at the same time. "Xiao Wan, I'm sorry. My second uncle is like this. He has a sharp tongue, but a soft heart. Please don't take what happened last time to heart." Qin Xian explained, thinking that Xiao Wan was still brooding over her second uncle's matter. However, Xiao Wan shook her head and said, "It doesn't matter. My mother didn't allow me to go out." As for Qin Xian's second uncle, Xiao Wan didn't take it to heart. Given their identities, it was destined that they wouldn't have much interaction, so there was no need to take it to heart. After hearing Xiao Wan's words, Qin Xian could only helplessly nod. Qin Xian, after all, since Zhao's mother didn't allow Xiao Wan to go out, what could he say? After all, the two of them had already passed the second round and were almost certain to enter Sword's Gate. The third round was merely a ranking competition. Qin and Qin Xian's second uncle to the entrance, Qin's twos to the door, to the door, to the door. Twos. And Qin, of course, Xiao. And was for him, of course, to enter was to the point, to the talk to him. To the was to chat, thought, to the was for. Lin Qing was naturally here because of Xiao Wan. However, when he saw Xiao Wan and Qin Xian appear together, Lin Qing was stunned. Looking at Qin Xian's appearance, Lin Qing quickly guessed that Qin Xian was probably pursuing Xiao Wan. As an experienced person, Lin Qing naturally saw through the clues at a glance. However, what Lin Qing did not expect was that before he could speak, Qin Xian's second uncle had already spoken first. "Xian, this is Vice Sect Leader Lin Qing. Hurry up and greet him. And you, little girl, greet him as well." Qin Xian's second uncle wanted to introduce Lin Qing to Qin Xian. He even called Xiao Wan along. Lin Qing's eyes flashed with displeasure when he heard Qin Xian's second uncle's words. It was because Qin Xian's second uncle's tone was filled with disdain when he spoke to Xiao Wan. Qin Xian's second uncle didn't know Xiao Wan's identity. In Lin Qing's eyes, his actions were simply courting death. However, Xiao Wan still didn't give Lin Qing a chance to speak. She came in front of Lin Qing and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Vice Sect Leader." As she spoke, she secretly made a funny face at Lin Qing. Lin Qing understood that Xiao Wan did not want to reveal his identity. After which, Qin Xian also hurriedly bowed. His attitude was very respectful and reverent. Lin Qing didn't reveal Xiao Wan's identity when the two young men bowed. However, Lin Qing's second uncle's next sentence made Lin Qing laugh. Qin Xian's second uncle introduced Xiao Wan to Lin Qing. "Vice Sect Leader Lin Qing, this is my elder brother's only son, Qin Xian. He is here to participate in the recruitment competition. As for Xiao Wan, she is my nephew's girlfriend. I hope Vice Sect Leader Lin Qing can take care of her." He directly described Xiao Wan as Qin Xian's girlfriend. Lin Qing was stunned when he heard this. He then looked at Xiao Wan with a strange expression and then looked at Qin Xian. It was undeniable that Qin Xian was handsome, but in Lin Qing's opinion, he was not worthy of Xiao Wan. Xiao Wan was the little princess of the Sword Sect. A mere young master of the Qin clan was nothing to her. However, Qin Xian's second uncle thought that Xiao Wan wasn't good enough for Qin Xian. When he talked about Xiao Wan, his tone was filled with disdain. If it wasn't for the fact that Xiao Chun and Xiao Wan didn't want to reveal their identities, Lin Qing would definitely teach Qin Xian's second uncle a lesson. However, he obviously couldn't do that now. As such, Lin Qing could only laugh dryly. "Haha, all right. I still have things to do. I won't stay any longer." After he finished speaking, Lin Qing walked away. He didn't give Qin Xian's second uncle any face. Qin Xian's second uncle naturally didn't dare to show any dissatisfaction. After Lin Qing left, Qin Xian's second uncle looked at Qin Xian and said, "Let's go." They still had to prepare for the third round. Although the third round was a ranking battle, the higher the ranking, the greater the benefits. Therefore, they couldn't afford to be careless. They completely ignored Xiao Wan. Before they left, Qin Xian bid farewell to Xiao Wan and left with his second uncle. After Qin Xian and his nephew left, Lin Qing, who had already left, appeared beside Xiao Wan again. He looked at Xiao Wan and said with a bitter smile, "Young miss, what are you up to this time?" "Uncle Lin, you can't expose my identity," Xiao Wan said with a smile. Xiao Wan was famous in the Sword Sect for being mischievous. However, it could be said that Lin Qing had watched Xiao Wan grow up. Therefore, Lin Qing doted on Xiao Wan like a senior to a junior. Qin Xian's second uncle's attitude made Lin Qing unhappy. However, when he saw Xiao Wan's pleading look, Lin Qing finally nodded helplessly. "All right, Uncle Lin won't speak nonsense. I know Uncle Lin is the best. All right, I'll go back now. Uncle Lin, you can continue with your work." Seeing that Lin Qing had agreed, Xiao Wan happily hugged Lin Qing and skipped away, begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22-27. After easily passing the second round of the competition, Xiao Wan happily returned home. Qin Shiru and the other girls were also happy to see Xiao Wan return safely. After easily passing the second round of the competition, Xiao Wan happily returned home. Qin Shiru and the other girls were also happy to see Xiao Wan return safely. Qin Shiru and the other girls weren't too concerned about whether Xiao Wan passed the second round of the competition or not. As long as Xiao Wan was safe, that was enough for them. However, apart from worrying about Xiao Wan's safety, Qin Shiru and the other girls were also thinking about another matter, which was Qin Xian. They had already investigated Qin Xian thoroughly. Although Qin Xian didn't have any major misdeeds since he was young, and his reputation was very good, the most important thing was that he was clean and honest. He seemed like a good junior. It was obvious that Qin Xian adored Xiao Wan. However, Qin Shiru and the other girls weren't very optimistic about Qin Xian. First of all, the difference in status between the two was too big. However, In this regard, Xiao Chun and Qin Shiru had a different opinion. According to Xiao Chun, they shouldn't interfere in the affairs of the youngsters. As long as Qin Xian didn't do anything out of line, they should be allowed to develop on their own. Everything depended on their own fate. As for the final result, Xiao Chun's idea was to let nature take its course. However, Qin Shiru and the other girls obviously disagreed. In the end, Xiao Chun couldn't stand them and directly threw this matter to them. Anyway, Xiao Chun had always been too lazy to care about such trivial matters. Unlike Xiao Wan, Qin Xian had been thinking about Xiao Wan ever since he returned to his residence with his second uncle. He didn't know why, but Xiao Wan's position in Qin Xian's heart was getting more and more important. Qin Xian didn't care about Xiao Wan's family background and other aspects, but Qin Xian's second uncle didn't think so. He had already ordered people to investigate Xiao Wan. However, there had been no news, which made Qin Xian's second uncle very puzzled. With the Qin family's means, it wasn't difficult to investigate a person's information. However, Xiao Wan was like a mystery that couldn't be investigated at all. With each of them having their own thoughts, the time for the third round of the ranking battle was quickly set. It would be held 3 days later, and this time, it would be held in the main square of the Sword Sect. There were a total of 7,000 people who passed the second round of the competition. The remaining 2,000 people failed. They were either killed by the disciples of the Heavenly Sect or were defeated by the disciples of the Heavenly Sect. Although they survived, they had no chance of becoming a disciple of the Sword Sect. 3 days passed quickly as they prepared for the third round of the ranking battles. On this day, over 7,000 young warriors who had passed the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles were finally able to enter the Sword Sect. After entering the Sword Sect, everyone curiously looked at everything around them. There were many young cultivators dressed in the Swords Gate disciples' attire, walking in and out of the pavilions. All of these made the young cultivators envious. The Sword Sect's environment was indeed picturesque. It was simply like a paradise on earth, especially when facing the senior disciples wearing the Sword Sect's uniform. These young warriors were even more excited. Fortunately, after passing the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles, they could already be considered as disciples of the Sword Sect. Today's ranking battles were only to determine their strength ranking. Under the guidance of a person, everyone was brought to the main square. At this time, there were already 10 arenas built in the main square. The third round of the ranking battles would be held here. Similarly, people like Qin Xian's second uncle could also watch the battles from the side. The Sword Sect had specially set up seats for them and provided them with fine wine and delicacies. Compared to the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles, the atmosphere of the third round was obviously much more relaxed. After all, even the losers could enter the Sword Sect. As a result, the pressure in everyone's hearts was naturally much less. Without any pressure, many young warriors gathered together and chatted in groups of 3 to 5. Qin Xian naturally found Xiao Wan at the first moment. Seeing Xiao Wan, Qin Xian was obviously very happy. He didn't know why, but in any case, Qin Xian really liked being with Xiao Wan. Sitting in the audience, Qin Xian's second uncle looked at Xiao Wan, who was chatting with Qin Xian. A trace of doubt involuntarily flashed through his eyes. Using the Qin clan's power, but in the end, they still couldn't find out Xiao Wan's identity. This made Qin Xian's second uncle extremely depressed. At the same time, he was secretly curious about Xiao Wan's identity. With the Qin clan's power, it was naturally impossible for them to find out anything if they wanted to investigate Qin Xian. Unless Qin Shiru and the other girls intentionally exposed Xiao Wan's identity, the Qin clan wouldn't be able to find any clues even if they investigated until the end. The competition soon began. The rules were obviously different from the first 2 rounds of the ranking battles. That was, no killing was allowed. Moreover, on each arena, there were dedicated Sword Sect deacons who were responsible for acting as referees. Of course, if necessary, they could intervene to prevent any deaths. The rules were obviously much softer, but this was normal. After all, over 7,000 young warriors present were basically new disciples of the Sword Sect. As such, it was obvious that they couldn't be casually killed. As usual, Lin Qing personally hosted the competition. After he loudly announced the start of the competition, all 10 arenas began to compete at the same time. The third round of the ranking battles was divided into 2 days. On the first day, the top 10 would be decided. On the second day, the top 10 would battle each other. As for Xiao Chun, he would only appear the next day. Today, only Lin Qing hosted the competition. All 10 arenas began to compete at the same time. As the battles began and ended, Xiao Wan also stepped onto the arena. After a few battles, Xiao Wan finally determined the top 10. Successfully entering the top 10 wasn't too difficult for Xiao Wan. After all, he had been personally taught by Xiao Chun since he was young. Xiao Wan's combat strength wasn't weak. It wasn't difficult for him to enter the top 10. At the same time, other than Xiao Wan, Qin Xian and Zhang Xian also entered the top 10. As the top 10 were finally determined, the first day of the competition also came to an end. Those who entered the top 10 would continue to compete in the top 10 finals the next day. Of course, being able to enter the top 10 had its own benefits. This benefit was that after entering the sword sect, they would be able to obtain various preferential treatment. They would be nurtured as core disciples by the sword sect and would be able to enjoy a certain degree of resources. After the announcement of the top 10, everyone was arranged to stay in the sword sect. As for the other disciples who didn't enter the top 10, they were directly accepted into the outer court of the sword sect. There was a special outer court deacon responsible for arranging their accommodations. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 22-28. Those who ranked in the top 10 were naturally happy because this ranking would bring them a lot of benefits after joining the sword sect. After the first day of the ranking battles ended, Qin Xian invited Xiao Wan to tour the sword sect. Now that he was considered a new disciple of the sword sect, Qin Xian wanted to familiarize himself with the sword sect in the future. Xiao Wan didn't reject Qin Xian's invitation. Both of them strolled around the sword sect together. Xiao Wan was incomparably familiar with the sword sect. After all, she grew up in the sword sect and had been to many places. However, Xiao Wan didn't tell Qin Xian about this, as she didn't want him to know her identity for the time being. Xiao Wan was clear that her identity would shock Qin Xian, which was why she chose to keep it a secret. However, as they walked side by side through the picturesque scenery of Swords Gate, they unknowingly arrived at the summit of one of the mountain peaks around Swords Gate. It was evening, and the sun was setting in the west. The blood-red sunset illuminated the surroundings beautifully. Qin Xian suddenly turned to Xiao Wan and said in a serious tone, "Xiao Wan, I like you." This was considered a straightforward confession. Qin Xian pondered for a long time before mustering the courage to say this. Xiao Wan was taken aback. This was the first time someone confessed to her, and Xiao Wan was at a loss. Xiao Wan didn't hate Qin Xian, but it was far from liking him. Xiao Wan had always treated Qin Xian as a good friend and didn't have the slightest bit of romantic feelings for him. Qin Xian continued, "I've fallen in love with you since the first time I met you." "Xiao Wan, I'm sincere." Qin Xian blurted out his thoughts without any hesitation. He was afraid that he wouldn't have the courage to say these words in the future. But after hearing Qin Xian's words, Xiao Wan blushed and shook her head shyly. "I'm sorry, Xiao Wan wanted to reject Qin Xian. However, before Xiao Wan could speak, Qin Xian interrupted, "Don't say anything. Just give me a chance. Don't be in a hurry to reject me." It was Qin Xian's first time confessing to the woman he liked. At this moment, his heart was also in a mess. However, compared to this, Qin Xian wanted to let Xiao Wan know his feelings. At the same time, he was also afraid that Xiao Wan would reject him. Therefore, after speaking his mind, Qin Xian did not expect Xiao Wan to agree on the spot. He only hoped that Xiao Wan would give him a chance. Looking at Qin Xian's pleading face, Xiao Wan didn't know how to answer. In the end, he could only say, "I'll bring you to a place. You can make your decision then." Xiao Wan didn't have any romantic feelings for Qin Xian, but he didn't want to hurt Qin Xian either. After all, Qin Xian was his friend. Not knowing how to deal with this, Xiao Wan thought of her mother and immediately brought Qin Xian back to her home. Xiao Wan's home was naturally Xiao Chen's home. However, Qin Xian didn't know anything about this at this moment. As the sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chen's residence was naturally the best in the sword sect. It also had the densest heaven and earth spiritual energy. Following Xiao Wan, Qin Xian arrived at the core area of the sword sect's main peak. Along the way, Qin Xian noticed something unusual. First, Xiao Wan seemed to be very familiar with the sword sect. Secondly, Xiao Wan was able to bring him through many areas guarded by the sword sect's disciples or areas protected by talisman arrays. Qin Xian already had a guess in his heart, so he probed, "Xiao Wan, is your family from the sword sect?" "You can say so." Xiao Wan nodded when he heard this. From Qin Xian's point of view, Xiao Wan's parents were probably some elders or deacons of the sword sect. This made sense. However, Qin Xian clearly didn't expect that Xiao Wan's parents weren't elders of the sword sect, but the sword sect's sect master, Xiao Chun. Under Xiao Wan's lead, the two quickly arrived at Xiao Chen's residence. After entering the residence, Qin Xian was simply stunned by the scene before him. The heaven and earth spiritual energy in the surroundings was extremely dense. It was comparable to the best cultivation secret realm in the Qin family, perhaps even surpassing it. Secondly, there was the fairyland-like environment in the cave, as well as the natural treasures that could be seen everywhere. Along the way, Qin Xian saw no less than 10 priceless treasures of heaven and earth. His eyes filled with shock, Qin Xian asked in disbelief, "Xiao Wan, is this really your home?" Hearing this, Xiao Wan turned to look at Qin Xian and said seriously, "Yes, let's go. I'll bring you to see my parents." Saying this, Xiao Wan brought Qin Xian to a bamboo garden. He knew that Xiao Chun must be here at this time. The environment was beautiful, surrounded by green bamboo. Under Xiao Wan's lead, Qin Xian quickly saw Xiao Chun in the bamboo forest. There was a simple wooden table and a praying mat. Dressed in white, Xiao Chun was sitting cross-legged on the praying mat, cultivating with his eyes closed. With the arrival of Xiao Wan and Qin Xian, Xiao Chun slowly opened his eyes. In fact, when Xiao Wan and Qin Xian had just entered the residence, Xiao Chun had already noticed Qin Xian, but he didn't stop him. Seeing Xiao Chun in front of him, Qin Xian was immediately stunned. He naturally knew who this handsome man was. As a young genius who wanted to enter the sword sect, Qin Xian had naturally seen Xiao Chen's portrait. Moreover, Qin Xian had always regarded Xiao Chun as his idol. He dreamed that one day he would be able to personally see what kind of person his idol was. Now, his idol was only 10 meters away from him, but Qin Xian was so nervous that he couldn't even speak. What Xiao Wan said next shocked Qin Xian to the extreme. Xiao Wan happily ran to Xiao Chun and intimately hugged Xiao Chen's neck. She happily shouted, "I knew Daddy was here. You little girl, there are friends here. Don't you know how to be shy? Come down." Facing Xiao Wan's affectionate behavior, Xiao Chun affectionately scolded her. "Daddy." Listening to the conversation between the father and daughter, Qin Xian finally found out about Xiao Wan's family background. Xiao Wan and Xiao Chun were both surnamed Xiao. However, who would have thought that Xiao Wan's father was the sect master of the sword sect, one of the top heroes in the Great Thousand World, Xiao Chun? Qin Xian was completely shocked. He didn't even know what to do next. Fortunately, Xiao Wan spoke in time to help him out. "Daddy, this is my friend, Qin Xian. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." End of chapter. Chapter 22-29. Xiao Wan took the initiative to introduce Qin Xian. Xiao Chen looked at his daughter strangely, but he still turned to Qin Xian and smiled. "Qin Xian, right? Don't be shy. Have a seat." Xiao Wan introduced Qin Xian. Xiao Chen looked at his daughter strangely, but he still turned to Qin Xian and smiled. "Qin Xian, right? Don't be shy. Have a seat." Xiao Chen appeared to be very easygoing, but even so, Qin Xian still appeared to be very nervous, so much so that he was at a loss for what to do. Xiao Chun didn't reveal any aura, nor did he take the initiative to exert any pressure on Qin Xian. Even so, Qin Xian still felt immense pressure when facing Xiao Chun. It was almost unbearable. Qin Xian couldn't be blamed. Not to mention Qin Xian, even the patriarch of the Qin clan would feel nervous in front of Xiao Chun. Qin Xian's reaction was normal. The reason why Xiao Wan brought Qin Xian here was to tell him about her background. Qin Xian had asked about Xiao Wan's identity in a roundabout way, but Xiao Wan had never answered him directly. Today, Qin Xian took the initiative to confess to Xiao Wan, so Xiao Wan decided to tell him everything. Xiao Wan didn't dislike Qin Xian, but it was still too early to say that she liked him. Moreover, if Qin Xian wanted to pursue her, he had to get past her family no matter what. If he couldn't even get past her family, how could Qin Xian be qualified to pursue Xiao Wan? Although Xiao Wan had never been in a relationship before, she was naturally intelligent and knew that everything depended on Qin Xian. Therefore, she remained silent at the side. Qin Xian instinctively sat opposite Xiao Chun, but even so, his back was still straight, and he looked like a block of wood. He did not dare to meet Xiao Chen's eyes. Seeing Qin Xian's appearance, Xiao Chun smiled slightly and personally made a cup of tea for him. Then he said with a smile, "My daughter has been spoiled by her mother since she was young. It has been hard on you during this period." As the sect master of the sword sect, Xiao Chun spoke casually, but Qin Xian hurriedly interjected. No, sect master, you're exaggerating." Qin Xian was unable to send a message. Xiao Chun could only smile bitterly. At the same time, Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy also arrived. Clearly, they knew that Xiao Wan had brought Qin Xian back. Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy knew everything about Qin Xian like the back of their hands. The information about Qin Xian's childhood had also been placed in front of them. This was their first official meeting with Qin Xian. However, compared to Xiao Chun, Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy did not seem to think highly of Qin Xian. Naturally, their expressions were not as casual as Xiao Chen's. Although Qin Shiru did not criticize Qin Xian directly, the two women did not have much of an expression on their faces when they arrived. They sat down on either side of Xiao Chun. Then, Qin Shiru whispered to Xiao Wan, "You're fooling around again. You even brought him back home." Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy naturally knew about the relationship between Qin Xian and Xiao Wan. They knew that Qin Xian had been pursuing Xiao Wan. However, Qin Shiru and the other women obviously did not like Qin Xian. Men and women had completely different thoughts on the same matter. For example, Xiao Chun did not mind at all. However, Qin Shiru and the other women were very cautious. After being scolded by Qin Shiru, Xiao Wan lowered her head in grievance. Seeing this, Qin Shiru did not say anything. Instead, he looked at Qin Xian and asked, "Qin Xian, don't be nervous. We have heard a little about you and Wan Wan. After all, Wan Wan is our daughter. Naturally, we have to care about her. May I know your purpose for coming here today?" Qin Xian did not know Qin Xian's purpose for coming here. Hearing this, Qin Xian did not know how to answer. Ever since he found out about Xiao Wan's identity, Qin Xian's head had been buzzing. He could not calm down at all. Qin Xian did not know how to answer and could only choose to remain silent. Fortunately, Xiao Chun interrupted at this moment. "All right, let's not add to the trouble of the children. Let Wan Wan and the others settle it themselves." Xiao Chun saw Qin Xian's nervousness and directly left with Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy, leaving Xiao Wan and Flower Fairy alone. Although Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy were unwilling to leave, since Xiao Chun had spoken, the two women could only obey. They got up and disappeared on the spot. After leaving the bamboo forest and returning to the courtyard, Flower Fairy said coquettishly, "What do you mean? Why do you have to make us leave? You two, didn't you see how nervous that kid from the Qin family was? What can you get out of him if you continue to ask?" In response, Xiao Chun said helplessly with a bitter smile, "Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy would not be able to get anything out of Qin Xian's state just now. It was better to let the two of them talk on their own." Xiao Chun did not want to interfere too much. After all, Xiao Wan was no longer a child. She had her own thoughts. Most of the time, it was not necessarily a good thing to interfere too much. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy rolled their eyes at Xiao Chen. Then, they did not say anything else and left. Seeing the two women leave, Xiao Chen shook his head and smiled bitterly. Who did he offend? It was as if he was a bad person. After Xiao Chen left with Qin Shiru and Flower Fairy, Qin Xian felt a lot more relaxed. Looking at Xiao Wan, Qin Xian hesitated for a while and finally asked in disappointment. Sect Master Xiao Chen, is he really your father? Yes. Xiao Wan nodded without the slightest hesitation. After knowing Xiao Wan's identity, Qin Xian felt a lot of pressure. Previously, when he was with Xiao Wan, Qin Xian thought that with his family background, he would never let Xiao Wan suffer any grievances, nor would he owe her anything. But now, it seemed that his thoughts were laughable. With Xiao Wan's identity, his identity as the young master of the Qin family was not worth mentioning at all. If Xiao Wan were to marry him in the future, it would be the same as marrying someone of a lower status. Qin Xian's gaze was complicated because Xiao Wan's identity was far beyond his expectations. After staring at Xiao Wan for a long time, Qin Xian finally gave up. You're telling me all this because you want me to back off and give up on my unrealistic thoughts? Qin Xian could not be blamed for having such thoughts. Anyone who encountered such a situation would inevitably have such thoughts. Therefore, it was not strange for Qin Xian to have such thoughts. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. End of chapter. Chapter 22:30. Qin Xian felt that Xiao Wan was telling him all this just to make him back off. However, Xiao Wan shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it." Qin Xian felt that Xiao Wan was telling him all this just to make him back off. However, Xiao Wan shook his head and said, "Don't worry about it. That's not what I meant. I admit that I don't like you, but I don't hate you either. As for your sudden confession, I really don't know how to handle it. So before I think it through, I hope that you can confirm your thoughts. Will you really be able to do what you said regardless of what kind of person I am?" Xiao Wan's thoughts weren't what Qin Xian said. Of course, if Qin Xian chose to give up because of this, Xiao Wan wouldn't say anything. After all, Xiao Wan didn't have any special feelings for Qin Xian. If Qin Xian continued to persist, perhaps Xiao Wan would be able to make up her mind and make her own choice one day in the future. Qin Xian took a deep look at Xiao Wan before standing up and mocking himself. "You've given me such a huge surprise. I think I need to calm down." Xiao Chen and Qin Shiru had left, leaving Xiao Wan alone. As a result, the pressure on Qin Xian was reduced by a lot. However, his heart was still in a mess, so Qin Xian needed to calm down by himself. Xiao Wan nodded slightly and personally sent Qin Xian out of the cave dwelling. She watched as Qin Xian left before turning around to return to the cave dwelling. Qin Xian didn't know how to choose, and this was actually what Xiao Wan was happy to see. If Qin Xian's first reaction after knowing her identity was to agree, perhaps Xiao Wan would be even more disappointed. Because such an answer didn't represent how much Qin Xian liked Xiao Wan, but rather, Qin Xian was interested in Xiao Wan's background. This wasn't the result that Xiao Wan wanted. Fortunately, Qin Xian didn't do that. Or perhaps, Qin Xian really had feelings for Xiao Wan, which was why he neglected Xiao Wan's background. Even though Xiao Wan had openly revealed his identity to Qin Xian, and he knew that Xiao Wan's identity could allow Qin Xian to reach the top in a single bound, Qin Xian still didn't care about this. Or rather, his focus wasn't on this. Qin Xian didn't even know how he returned to his residence. He only knew that after leaving Xiao Wan's place, he was walking in a daze. Unknowingly, he arrived outside his residence. It was a small courtyard, but the scenery was very good. This was the residence that the sword sect prepared for Qin Xian and his second uncle. It was located in the outer area of the sword sect and was used to entertain guests. After going out for such a long time, the sky had already darkened. Qin Xian returned in a daze. Seeing this, Qin Xian's second uncle walked up to support Qin Xian's body with a puzzled expression. "Xian, what happened to you?" Qin Xian's condition clearly wasn't right. Tomorrow was the third round's battle for the top 10. At this moment, Qin Xian's second uncle obviously couldn't bring out his strongest strength. This was why Qin Xian's second uncle was so worried. After helping Qin Xian sit down in the pavilion in the courtyard, he personally poured a cup of tea for Qin Xian. After watching Qin Xian drink it in one gulp, his second uncle continued to ask, "Xianer, what happened to you? Where did you go just now?" Qin Xian's second uncle continued to ask. Qin Xian's second uncle was still fine. How did he become like this after going out? Under his second uncle's interrogation, Qin Xian finally spoke. "I went to Xiao Wan's house just now." Xiao Wan's house? Qin Xian's second uncle was startled. Although the Qin family had used all their resources to investigate Xiao Wan, they still didn't find anything. And now, Qin Xian actually said that he went to Xiao Wan's house. He was even more puzzled. At the same time, he asked curiously, "Xiao Wan's house is in the sword sect? What's her identity?" This was the sword sect. Besides, Qin Xian's second uncle also heard that Xiao Wan's family wasn't among the guests. So why was Xiao Wan's house in the sword sect? Could it be that, just like Qin Xian, his second uncle guessed that Xiao Wan's family couldn't be a deacon or elder in the sword sect, right? This was the only explanation why Xiao Wan's house was in the sword sect. However, Qin Xian's next sentence also caused his second uncle to be stunned on the spot. Qin Xian spoke in a neither hurried nor slow manner. Xiao Wan's father is sect master Xiao Chun. Xiao Wan was Xiao Chen's daughter. Hearing this, Qin Xian's second uncle was stunned. He stood there motionless and said in disbelief after a long while, "That's right. Xian, this isn't a joke. Sect master Xiao Chun isn't our Qin families." He thought that Qin Xian was joking. But shortly after, Qin Xian said with certainty, "I'm not joking. I went to Xiao Wan's house and saw sect master Xiao Chun. He is Xiao Wan's father." Qin Xian definitely wasn't joking about this matter. Qin Xian's second uncle was speechless. No wonder the Qin family couldn't find any traces of Xiao Wan, even after mobilizing so much manpower. So that's the reason. It would be strange if the Qin family could find out anything about Xiao Chen's daughter. Previously, Qin Xian's second uncle thought that Xiao Wan was at most a descendant of an aristocratic family. But in terms of strength, she definitely couldn't be compared to the Qin family. Therefore, Qin Xian's second uncle looked down on Xiao Wan. But now, Xiao Wan was actually Xiao Chen's daughter. Qin Xian's second uncle was shocked when he thought about how he looked down on Xiao Wan. "Xianer, since that's the case, then why did I..." Qin Xian's second uncle panicked when he thought about how he looked down on Xiao Wan. He was afraid that Xiao Wan would take revenge. After all, with Xiao Wan's status, it was easy for her to persuade a vice sectmaster of the sword sect to deal with the Qin family. Even if the Qin family had 3 end realm ancestors, they wouldn't be able to resist a vice sectmaster of the sword sect. At the very least, they would be severely injured. Qin Xian's heart was filled with fear. But compared to her second uncle, Qin Xian appeared calm. "Don't worry, Xiao Wan isn't such a person. Besides, if she really holds a grudge, do you think you can still stand here and talk to me?" She didn't think that Xiao Wan would take revenge on her second uncle because of such a small matter. Moreover, even if she wanted to take revenge, she would have done it long ago. Why would she wait until now? After telling her second uncle not to worry, Qin Xian walked back to her room. Leaving behind a simple sentence, she returned to her room. "I'm a little frustrated. Second uncle, please don't disturb me. Let me think about it." Begging to be added, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Sword Master 8 Desolation will continue to update on Green Dough. There are no advertisements on the website. Please add and recommend Green Dough. If you like Sword Master 8 Desolation, please add. Sword Master 8 Desolation Green Dough updates the fastest. Chapter 2231. Today, Xiao Wan had truly shocked Qin Xian. Facing Xiao Wan, who had such a background, Qin Xian naturally couldn't be as relaxed as before. In front of Xiao Wan, Qin Xian's status as the young master of the Qin clan was simply too weak. Today, Xiao Wan had truly shocked Qin Xian. Facing Xiao Wan, who had such a background, Qin Xian naturally couldn't be as relaxed as before. In front of Xiao Wan, Qin Xian's status as the young master of the Qin clan was simply too weak. Qin Xian needed to be alone. Regarding this, Qin Xian's second uncle was also stunned in the courtyard. He was still shocked by Xiao Wan's identity. He had never imagined that Xiao Wan was actually Xiao Chen's daughter. However, after recovering from his shock, Qin Xian's second uncle suddenly recalled that Qin Xian was currently pursuing Xiao Wan. Looking at Xiao Wan's appearance, it seemed like she didn't hate Qin Xian. In that case, if Qin Xian and Xiao Wan could really fall in love with each other, wouldn't the Qin clan and Xiao Chun become in-laws? For the Qin family, there were obviously many benefits. After all, the in-laws were equivalent to a family. Thinking of this, Qin Xian's second uncle was elated. He immediately sent a message to his elder brother, who was Qin Xian's father and the current patriarch of the Qin clan. Far away from the sword mansion, in a beautiful garden of the Qin clan, the patriarch of the Qin clan was cultivating with his eyes closed. Suddenly, a golden ray of light from a sound transmission talisman entered his head. Needless to say, this voice transmission talisman belonged to Qin Xian's second uncle. After knowing the contents of the voice transmission talisman, the patriarch of the Qin clan abruptly opened his eyes. Evidently, he was shocked. The content of the letter was naturally related to Xiao Wan and Qin Xian. Furthermore, it clearly introduced Xiao Wan's status. The daughter of the sword sect leader, Xiao Chun, Xiao Wan actually had such an identity. In that case, if Qin Xian could successfully pursue Xiao Wan, it would be a great contribution to the Qin clan. After being shocked, the patriarch of the Qin clan revealed an excited smile. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. After pacing back and forth and pondering for a moment, Patriarch Qin quickly replied. He told Qin Xian's second uncle that there was no need to do anything for the time being. Qin Xian and Xiao Wan should just wait and see. Although he knew what benefit Xiao Wan would bring to the Qin clan if she married into the Qin clan, the old and shrewd Master Qin also knew that Xiao Wan's identity was very sensitive. If the Qin clan had any tricks up their sleeves, it would be self-defeating. At that time, if they angered Xiao Chun, not only would the Qin family not get any benefits, they would also have to prepare for Xiao Chen's anger. Therefore, it wasn't appropriate for the other members of the Qin family to make any moves at this time. Qin Xian should handle everything himself. As for the final result, it would depend on the fate of the two. In short, he couldn't let Xiao Chun think that Qin Xian was pursuing Xiao Wan with ulterior motives. It wouldn't benefit Qin Xian or the entire Qin clan. Patriarch Qin had indeed made the right choice. At this time, it wasn't appropriate for the Qin clan to make any moves. In the sword sect, Qin Xian's second uncle soon received Patriarch Qin's reply. After understanding his elder brother's intentions, Qin Xian's second uncle stood up and returned to his room to rest. Although Qin Xian had given the Qin clan a huge surprise by hooking up with Xiao Chen's daughter, the Qin clan was calmer at this time. It wasn't unreasonable for the Qin clan to be able to survive for so many generations. At the very least, the person in charge of the Qin clan was very clear-headed. He knew when to make the right choice. It was also because of this that the Qin clan had made the right choice time and time again, allowing the Qin clan to maintain its prosperity. Although Xiao Wan's identity was very attractive, the Qin clan didn't have to make any moves in the dark. This was because not only would there be no benefits, but it would also make Xiao Chun feel disgusted. The losses outweighed the gains. The Qin clan didn't make any moves and left everything to Qin Xian. As for the final result, it was up to the heavens. The Qin clan didn't make any movements at all, and the night was silent. Early the next morning, the third round of the ranking tournament would begin. Once again, they arrived at the main square. However, on this day, only one of the original 10 arenas remained. It stood at the center of the square. Qin Xian came with his second uncle. As soon as he arrived, he looked around. As expected, he soon saw Xiao Wan's figure. Qin Xian didn't deliberately avoid her and greeted her as usual. Xiao Wan. Seeing Qin Xian, Xiao Wan casually smiled and nodded. The two of them didn't mention what happened yesterday. Qin Xian also didn't do anything special. They stood side by side and chatted casually. After thinking for an entire day yesterday, Qin Xian still couldn't come up with an answer. Until now, Qin Xian still didn't know what decision he had made. In the end, he could only take one step at a time. Let nature take its course. Just as Qin Xian and Xiao Wan were chatting, Xiao Chun, Song Xing, and a few other deputy sect leaders slowly appeared on the high platform in the main square. Xiao Chun was indeed present for today's ranking battle. When everyone saw Xiao Chun, they hurriedly bowed respectfully. In response, Xiao Chun revealed a faint smile and waved his hand. Everyone, please take a seat. Today is the last day of the recruitment competition. Everyone present is the cream of the crop among the hundreds of thousands of people. I hope that all of you will be able to display your full strength without holding back and obtain a good ranking. Xiao Chun said calmly. Seeing Xiao Chun again, Qin Xian realized that even though it was his first time facing Xiao Chun, he still couldn't help but feel nervous. Even though they were so far apart, Xiao Wan was able to make him feel so simple. It was hard to imagine how he would feel when facing Xiao Chun in the future if he really got together with Xiao Wan. Having such a powerful father-in-law wasn't necessarily a good thing. Of course, nothing was set in stone yet. It was still too early to talk about this. Compared to the others, Qin Xian obviously had more thoughts in his mind when facing Xiao Chun. At the same time, Qin Xian's second uncle also had the same thoughts when looking at Xiao Chun on the high platform. He also knew about the relationship between Xiao Wan and Qin Xian. When he thought about the possibility of the two of them being together in the future, he couldn't help but have other thoughts when he looked at Xiao Chun, who was sitting on a main seat. Although his elder brother had already given the order to not let the other members of the Qin clan do anything, this didn't stop him from fantasizing about it. Looking at Xiao Chun on the high platform, Qin Xian's second uncle couldn't help but think that if Xiao Wan and Qin Xian really got together, then the Qin clan and the Xiao clan would become the Qin clan. At that time, the Qin clan would have a powerful backer like the Sword Sect, begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. In a chapter. If you dare to harm even a single hair on Xiao Wan's head, our senior brothers will teach you a lesson. Most of the senior disciples in the Sword Sect knew Xiao Wan, so they naturally paid close attention to Xiao Wan's match. Moreover, because Zhang Xian was ruthless when he attacked Qin Xian, they immediately glared at Zhang Xian as a warning. Zhang Xian was puzzled. Why did so many senior disciples suddenly look at him with such hostility? Naturally, Zhang Xian didn't know that it was all because of Xiao Wan. However, under such gazes, Zhang Xian felt very uncomfortable. Forcefully suppressing the nervousness in his heart, Zhang Xian looked at Xiao Wan and revealed a smile. Beauty, we meet again. Hearing Zhang Xian's words, Xiao Wan didn't reply. On the stage, Nangongwan also smiled at Xiao Chun. Junior brother, this brat has guts. He actually dared to take liberties with Wan Wan. Hearing Nangongwan's words, Xiao Chun smiled and said, It's a waste if one isn't frivolous. This Zhang Xian is a good seedling, but his temperament still needs to be tempered. With his current status, Xiao Chun naturally wouldn't bicker with a junior like Zhang Xian. Moreover, Zhang Xian's talent was indeed not bad. At the very least, among the new disciples recruited this time, he was definitely one of the best. The only flaw was Zhang Xian's personality and his narrow-mindedness. However, this wasn't a big problem. With more tempering in the future, it wasn't impossible for him to become a talent. Seeing that Xiao Chun didn't show any signs of anger, Nangongwan smiled and didn't say anything else. She turned her head to look at the two people on the stage, waiting for the final result. Begging for your collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Now that Long Mie had completely wiped out Dragon Palace, his role was completely gone. It was normal for Tao Ming to replace him. Hearing Tao Ming's words and seeing Tao Ming walking towards him step by step, Long Mie finally realized the seriousness of the problem. When he joined forces with Tao Ming to kill Long Yuan, it was actually leading the wolf into the house. Now, the wolf finally showed its ferocity. Unfortunately, Long Mie had no means to contend with Tao Ming. Looking at Long Mie's horrified eyes and expression, Tao Ming said faintly, "Learn to be smarter in your next life. That old man Long Yuan is right about one thing. You are indeed too stupid. Remember, any form of cooperation requires a bargaining chip, and now you have no bargaining chip in your hand." With that, Tao Ming pointed his finger and Long Mie died on the spot. Chapter 22:37. The Dragon Palace was taken over by Tao Ming and Yang Chun. Xiao Chun had already expected such an outcome. After all, how could that trash Long Mie suppress Tao Ming and Yang Chun? Now that the Dragon Palace was destroyed and the Hetian sect was established once more, Xiao Chun wasn't too surprised as this was an expected outcome. When Xiao Chun received the news of the Dragon Palace being destroyed, Long Qing, who was also in the Sword sect, and the two End Realm experts that Xiao Chun brought back also heard the news. After knowing that the Dragon Palace was really destroyed, the three of them were devastated, especially the two End Realm experts. They had been in the Dragon Palace their entire lives, but in the end, they could only watch as it was destroyed and couldn't do anything. They hated Long Mie to the extreme. If it wasn't for him, the Dragon Palace wouldn't have fallen to such a state. It was Long Mie's own stupidity that destroyed the entire Dragon Palace. Long Mie was indeed stupid, and his death wasn't regrettable. However, the destruction of the Dragon Palace made the three of them feel bad. After thinking for a long time, Long Qing suddenly said, "Join the Sword sect. Only the Sword sect can help us take revenge." The Dragon Palace was already gone. After thinking for a long time, Long Qing decided to join the Sword sect. Of course, this was mainly for the two of them. After all, with the relationship between Long Qing and Xiao Chun, it didn't make much of a difference whether they joined the Sword sect or not. As for the two Dragon Palace elders, although they had always been in the Sword sect, they weren't from the Sword sect. Xiao Chun only allowed them to stay in the Sword sect because of Long Qing. Now that the Dragon Palace was destroyed, they, who were once experts of the Dragon Palace, naturally became rootless duckweeds. Moreover, the best way to take revenge was to join the Sword sect and help the Sword sect destroy the Hetian sect. This would be considered taking revenge for the Dragon Palace. Hearing Long Qing's words, the two of them were stunned. However, they didn't immediately agree, but they also didn't have much objection. The two of them didn't have much resistance to joining the Sword sect. However, because they had been part of the Dragon Palace for most of their lives, it was hard for them to suddenly change. Long Qing did not rush the two of them when he saw them fall into silence. He waited quietly at the side. After a long while, the two of them looked at each other and then looked at Long Qing and said, "We'll listen to you." Both of them respected Long Qing very much. After all, Long Qing was the dragon girl of the Dragon Palace. Their loyalty to the Dragon Palace had long been engraved in their bones. Therefore, in their eyes, Long Qing was now their backbone. The two of them agreed to join the Sword sect, but it still depended on Xiao Chen's opinion.